Since Kach is first and foremost an ideological movement and not a political party, one of the problems we had with JDL was that, despite the fact that people did not realize it, JDL was also primarily an ideological movement, not merely an activist group. And what happened was, therefore, that many people joined and didn't really know what they were joining. They thought they knew what they were joining. They didn't really know. Many people joined JDL because they saw it as an opportunity to hit. Nothing wrong with hitting the right people. But if you join a group because you want to hit, invariably you will end up hitting the wrong people too. And an ideological movement teaches you whom to hit and whom not to hit. And that violence is sometimes necessary and sometimes it is wrong. Only when one has an ideological bent does one know what to do and what not to do at the right time. In great measure, Kach, certainly in Israel, the overwhelming majority of voters for Kach think that Kach is a movement that was created to throw the Arabs out of Israel, which of course is not true. Kach is an ideological movement with an overview of the Jewish people, and with a great many stands on a great many issues. An overview. One of the issues is the question of Arabs inside Israel. But hardly the only issue, and certainly even on that issue alone, people don't understand what Kach wants from Arabs, what doesn't want from Arabs. And so it's important that Kach, first of all, begin to put out leaders. Secondly, even the ordinary members should know exactly what Kach is, and above all, what Kach is not. And so we decided to hold a series of seminars, perhaps 2 or 3 a year, in which people would hopefully come and take notes, which is why you're here. This isn't a speech. It's a seminar to take notes and to ask questions, and to walk out of here with a little greater knowledge of what Kach really is, and in essence what Judaism really is, because Kach is not an island unto itself. Everything that it draws from Judaism and from Halakha. And one of the important things is not only for someone who doesn't know Judaism to know what Judaism says on these issues, but even more to the point, many Orthodox Jews who think that they know what Judaism says, and they really don't. They should know what it really says and not what they were taught in their school by people who also think that they know what it says and who don't. Today what we'll do is we'll divide the seminar into 2 parts. The first part will be devoted to a substantive area of what is the Jewish people in terms of Judaism, what is the land of Israel, and so on and so forth, the relationship of Jews and non-Jews within Judaism. And the second part will be a seminar dedicated to Kach policy over the years and Kach policy in the future. So the first part will be given over to the question of the Jewish people. What is the Jew in terms of Judaism? And at a time when everybody's talking about who is a Jew, by far the greater question is, why is a Jew? Why is a Jew? Who is a Jew? Who cares who is a Jew or not, if one doesn't know why one should be a Jew? If we don't know why one should be a Jew, who cares who is a Jew? the Jewish people, the essence of the Jewish people is that it is a chosen people. The essence is that it is not like all the other nations. When you study government or political science in school, they always have a basic course which tells you how people began, how nations began. And invariably they will tell you that nations began in one of two ways, perhaps. First of all, there were families and tribes. And gradually there was a problem. A strong tribe started beating up all the other tribes. Or a foreign tribe started beating up all these other tribes. And so they gathered together for protection. And so they will tell you that self-defense and protection is the origin of nationalism. That's how nations began. That tribes gave up their independence for the sake of protection. Or people turned to a king and said, okay, we'll make you king if you protect us. We exchange our freedom for that. And gradually that's how the tribes came together and became a nation. Or others will tell you that, other theories, that various groups who lived along a certain river, and gradually, in order to guarantee that each of the people would have the proper and equal amount of water rights, so they got together and they organized, all of the people living along the river were organized together, and eventually from that came forth. That's not relevant. It isn't important. Whatever the reason that nations evolved naturally, the Jewish people did not evolve naturally. The Jewish people did not become a people through evolution. There was a specific moment in Jewish history when the Jewish people became a people. First of all, this concept of a Jewish people. And I think it is very important that every time that we speak, we have sources. We have sources, because anybody can give views and opinions, but if you're speaking about Judaism, then you have to give sources in Judaism. Otherwise, if you're not going to base your views on sources within Judaism, then if your name is Cohen, then you're giving Cohenism, which is fine, but don't call it Judaism. The first time that we find the promise of God that he will create a special people is to Abraham. It's in Bereshit, in Genesis chapter 17, in which God says the following to Abraham. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee, for an everlasting covenant to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. Over here we find that Abraham was chosen as the person through whom a nation will be born. The nation has not yet been born yet. But what we do have here is the father of the nation is chosen. Again, that's in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 17. And there God says, from you, through you, I begin a nation. I begin a nation. And the nation will be a chosen nation. I have chosen them. Furthermore, it also adds not only a nation, but also a land. And we'll come back to this question of the land soon, because the Jewish people is not only a chosen people in a very special way, it is also a different kind of people. It is the only religion, or religionation, which is also land-centered. One doesn't have to live in any particular country to be a Catholic. But Judaism is land-centered. And so he continues and he says, and I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Now, the Arabs oftentimes jump on this and say, you see, Abraham was promised the land. It was promised him and his seed. Now, it's true that Isaac was his son, but so was Ishmael. And they will jump on this thing and so on. And Jews who, of course, know nothing about the Chumash or the Bible or any else Jewish. Of course, that sounds good, That sounds good. He continues and he says, in the same chapter, he says, and as for Ishmael, I have heard. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac. So that is the clear, first of all, since when did Arabs look upon the Bible as any kind of a source? That's the first thing. All of a sudden the Bible they say the Bible says. But if they're going to use the Bible already, very, very important that people don't pick and choose their Bible. If you're going to pick one verse here, finish it. Never take things out of context. Over here, it's quite clear who the seed is. The seed is clear. Ishmael will be a great man and a prince and everything else, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac. That's clear, and not with Ishmael. The promise continues from Abraham to Isaac. And in Bereshit chapter 26, we find a famine has broken out in Canaan. And Isaac wants to leave. He wants to leave. He wants to leave because there's famine. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore unto Abraham thy father. Right. So we see the chosenness has now been passed on from the father of the nation to the second, Isaac. And that in turn continues with Jacob. When Jacob is about to flee his brother Esau. So Isaac blesses him before he flees. And in Bereshit chapter 28, and Isaac called Jacob and blessed him. And he said, And God Almighty shall bless thee and make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee. Once again, we see that one of the sons and not the other is chosen. He also has two sons. Isaac also has two sons, Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau. But the blessing is given to Jacob and not to Esau. And he says, And give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, the land which God gave unto Abraham. So what we have here are three blessings already. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. The three patriarchs, the three fathers. And indeed, God himself says it to Jacob. He doesn't only depend upon Isaac passing it on. When Isaac flees and he dreams his famous dream of the ladder and everything else, so God speaks to him and he says, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father and the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And so, what we have is the choosing of the patriarchs from whom there will be a nation created. The choosing of the patriarchs from whom will come a chosen nation. And in Sefer Shemot, in the book of Exodus, in chapter 6, God now speaks to Moses. By this time, the Jewish people were there, and they're not yet a people. They are still called throughout this area Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. These are still the families. These are tribes. There is no nation yet. It is only the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that was promised that they would be a nation. And so God speaks to Moses and he says, "And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you in unto the land, concerning which I did swear to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for an heritage. I am the Lord." Now we have suddenly something else now. After the first three patriarchs, at that point, anyone who was born from Jacob was part of the seed. In the case of Abraham, God was not yet sure which of Abraham's children would be worthy. And so he decided Isaac would and not Ishmael. In the case of Isaac, he wasn't sure which of his two children would be worthy. And he decided that Jacob, yes, and Esau, not. By the time there were these three patriarchs, what you have here is a presumption of chosenness. And from that point on, everyone who was born a Jew was going to be part of the chosen people. They're not yet a people. They're still tribes. They're still the children of Israel, but the promise is there. And now they come to, by the way, that was in Shemot chapter 6, Exodus chapter 6. And now they come to Har Sinai, to Mount Sinai. And in chapter 19 in Shemot, in Exodus, he now comes, and this is the moment of Jewish history. This is what is going to make this people different from all other peoples. Everyone else evolves. No one knows at what moment in history the English became a people, or the French became a people. It was an evolution. There was a specific moment in Jewish history when the Jews as tribes became a nation, a people, and that is at Sinai. And so right before Mount Sinai, right before the giving of the Torah, God speaks to Moses in chapter 19 and he says, "Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then shall you be a special treasure unto me above all people. For all the earth is mine. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." This is the chosenness. They're a chosen nation, and above all, they're a holy nation. They're a holy nation. And we'll come back to this concept of what being holy is, because in this lies the whole question, why did God choose the Jewish people? God doesn't just decide to choose people. He chooses people for a reason and for a mission. We'll come to that soon. But what we're looking at now is the whole question of chosenness. And the interesting thing is that on this verse, in which it says, God quotes Moses and he says, "Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob and tell the children of Israel, you will be my, if you obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you should be a special people and a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." On this verse, the commentator Rashi has an interesting comment. And he brings down from the Medrash. He says, "Tell them this, lo pachot v'lo yoter. Nothing less than this, and nothing more than this." This is the first message that God is giving to the Jewish people per se, and not just to Moses. He says, go down and tell them the following message. Don't add anything, and don't detract from it. Just tell them this. Here, what is so important to insist that don't add anything to it? Don't bring in Shabbos and don't bring black kosher. Don't bring anything at all. Just say this. And the answer is because this is the foundation of the Jewish people. To be different and special and holy and separate. If you're that, then the other laws will fall into place. But to bear in mind that you are chosen, that you are special, that you are different, that you are separate. That is the essence of being a Jew. Because then you'll ask, well, if I'm different, I'm special, I'm chosen, how am I chosen? What am I supposed to do to be different? Then we'll get on to the rest. It's very, very much the same question. Is a very, very interesting, remarkable portion of the Talmud. It discusses the reason why the second temple was destroyed. I think there's a whole bunch of reasons. And one of the reasons given is a very peculiar one. It says, because they did not make the first blessing over the Torah. That's a rather strange thing. Because they didn't make the first blessing over the Torah, that's why that was destroyed. And the answer is obvious, really. I mean, it's an obvious answer. What is the first blessing in the Torah? Asher b'chalbanu mikol ha'amim, who has chosen us from all the nations. If the Jew does not say that, and does not believe that, and does not act upon that, I am chosen from all the nations, and therefore I separate myself from them. From that will then come he'll then be like everybody. And from that will come a destruction. So, here is the first time that God speaks to the Jewish people through Moses, and he says, tell them this is the fundamental message. You're a chosen people, you're a special people, a nation of priests, a holy nation. And this theme is said over and over and over again. I mean, I can't possibly go over everything, but I do want to give you all of these sources because it's imperative that you know these sources and that you jot these sources down and see them so that you'll become scholars in the proper way, in the right way. In Dvarim, Perek Zayin, Deuteronomy chapter 7. So God again goes and he says the following. He says to the Jews as follows. He says, for thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all the people that are upon the face of the earth. Now, one can't get more racist than that. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, this is not racism. Obviously not. Any non-Jew, and that's the reason why Judaism has conversion. Any non-Jew who wants to be chosen can be chosen by joining the Jewish people. And then he too is chosen. Chosenness is not a racial concept. It's not an ethnic concept. Jews are certainly not a race. Of course not. Jews aren't even an ethnic people, with all of the converts that have come in from different races and from different peoples. Nevertheless, we are chosen. We are above all the peoples. If all the peoples would like to be on our level, so join us. But if you don't join us, then know that we are on a higher spiritual level. The same thing is said over and over again in chapter 14 in Dvarim, Deuteronomy. Again, for thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all the nations that are upon the earth. And again, in chapter 26, and it's important to note how many times the Torah repeats this, because it knows the Jewish people. It knows that Jews don't want to be chosen. I just don't want... Jews want nothing more than to be just like everybody else. Not worse than everyone else, but not better than anyone else. Because if you're better, then people hate you. I don't want to be hated, right? Well, too big. The point is that that's exactly what the Talmud means when it says, why was the mountain upon which the Torah was given called Sinai? So it comes from the Hebrew word sinah, which means hatred. It was from there came forth hatred. Two kinds of hatred. First of all, hatred of God to the nations that refuse to accept the Torah. And secondly, hatred of the nations to the Jewish people for being chosen. But it is a hatred which we cannot escape. Because one cannot escape his chosenness. Whether we like it or don't like it, one cannot escape being a Jew. And so again, in chapter 26 in Deuteronomy, he says again, Thou hast chosen the Lord this day to be thy God, and to walk in his ways, and to keep his statutes, and his commandments, and his judgments, and to hearken unto his voice. And the Lord hath chosen thee this day to be his special people, as he hath promised thee, and to make thee high above all the nations which he hath made, in praise, and in name, and in honor, that thou mayest be a holy people unto the Lord thy God, as he hath spoken. Clearly what we have here is a condition. We are chosen to keep God's commandments. Now the fact if a Jew gets up and says, I don't want to be chosen, and I won't keep the commandments, too late. Too late. The covenant is made, and it is an unbreakable. The covenant is made. It's too late. And so, in Dvarim, in chapter 30, God speaks to the Jews and he says as follows, See, I have set before thee this day life and good, and death and evil. And that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that thou mayest live and multiply. And the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land whither thou goest to possess it. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. This is the essence of the basic Jewish concept of free will. This is free will. God sets before the Jew life and death, the good and evil. And he says, choose good. No one forces a Jew to do good. No one forces a Jew to do evil. No one forces a Jew to do anything. We have free will. And so therefore we cannot escape it by saying everything is predestined, and therefore I had no choice. Whatever I did was predestined. That is not the Jewish way. That's Calvinism. But that is not Judaism. Judaism declares that the Jew has a choice. Whatever he wants to do. You want to do good, you do good. You want to do evil, you'll do evil, but you'll pay for it. It isn't that, it's true that you have freedom to do what you want, but you have an obligation to do the right thing. And so this is the essence of the Jewish people. They are a special people, they're a chosen people, and in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, in the 3rd chapter, it says, Blessed is Israel, who are called the children of God. A special love was granted unto them. God loves all his children, all his creatures. But a special love was granted to them. Chiba yetera. Really it should mean an extra love. An extra love, a special love was granted to the Jewish people. So that when people say, but aren't all men created in God's image? Of course, they were all created in God's image. But a special love was given to the Jewish people. Not to mention the fact that when people say, weren't all men created in God's image, what they really mean is the men that they think we shouldn't do anything bad to, like Arabs. But if it is true that all men were created in God's image, which it is true, so was Hitler. So was Stalin. And Genghis Khan. Everyone was created in God's image. What God looks at is what the person did to the image after he was created with it. That's the difference. Of course you were created in God's image. The question is, what did you do to my image? Years ago, there was a famous book by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. And it's in the book, I don't know the story, but eventually the hero of the book has a portrait of himself. He is a handsome, perfect person, and so is the portrait. And he stays perpetually untouched and young, and apparently perpetually unchanged. But the changes are shown in the picture, and the picture becomes ugly. Well, the image of God, which is in an evil person, becomes ugly. You don't see it, perhaps, on the person, but in the image, it's there. It becomes ugly. It becomes twisted. It becomes corrupt. In the Medrash, in the Tanchuma, in the Medrash it says, the Holy One, blessed be He, created the 70 nations, the world. But of them all, He found pleasure only in Israel. That's the Medrash. That's Judaism. In all, He found pleasure only in Israel. Judaism sets down this concept of the Jews as a chosen people. And furthermore, in Judaism there is something very, very different. Judaism is the only faith in which the entire people saw the great event. When Judaism began, it was given to the whole people. Now consider carefully. First of all, consider carefully other faiths. Islam. In Islam, the fundamental belief is that the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and gave him the Quran. The next day he woke up and he said, guess what? The angel Gabriel came to me. He gave me the Quran. Now, if you believe him, you believe him. If you don't believe him, you don't believe him. Nobody saw it except Muhammad, who claims that this happened. If you have faith, you have faith. If not, not. In Christianity, it's a little bigger. The circle of people that claim to have seen miracles, a little bit bigger. How many more? Several tens claim to have seen miracles. In Judaism, God knew that if He knew the Jewish people. That if Moses would show up one day and say, guess what? God spoke to me and gave me a Torah. Can you imagine what they would do to Moses? Can you imagine? Can you imagine the cynical articles and the cynical books and the cynical comments, and on television, on radio, some nut named Moses came and said, and if he would have given it to 70 great rabbis, it would have been the same thing. There were 70 other rabbis who didn't get it would have said, it's a lie, we didn't get it. So what happens here is that in Judaism, something very, very special happens. God decides to give the Torah to the whole Jewish people. Every man, woman, child, cat, dog, cow, sheep, everything. Everyone is going to see this event. And so, we find in Shemot, in Exodus, in chapter 19, we find again. And it came to pass on the third day, in the morning, and there was thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the horn exceeding loud, so that all the people in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God. And Mount Sinai was altogether with smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the horn sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by a voice. And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the horn and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they heard the voice of God. They heard the voice of God. And so, when Moses is about to die, he tells the people that. He reminds them in Dvarim, chapter 4. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, we find that Moses tells them again. He says, remember, remember, he said. Did ever a people hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of fire, as thou hast heard and lived? Out of heaven he made thee to hear his voice, that he might instruct thee. Upon earth he showed thee his great fire, and thou heard his words out of the midst of the fire. That is the reason why the Jewish people don't base their faith upon faith. They base their faith upon observation. And that's why over and over and over again in the Torah commands the people, tell your children, I was there, I saw it. Now you tell your child that his grandfather told you to tell your child, and that he should tell his child. And so the events at Sinai are events that are based upon observation and witness, not upon faith. God doesn't want Jews to have faith because he knows that they are faithless people. They're not going to believe. They doubt everything. They doubt every single thing imaginable until they see it. If I can't see it, if I can't touch it, prove it to me. And so therefore, he said, this you all saw it. This wasn't something which some of the chosen rabbis. No, there were no chosen rabbis here. You all saw it. Tell your children. Tell them to tell their children. Tell them to pass it down to their children so that there should be a chain of witnesses to the observation. That is the difference between Judaism and Islam and Christianity. No one saw Muhammad receive the Quran. Nobody. He came and he said, guess what? The angel gave me the Quran. You believe, you believe. You don't believe, you don't. Nobody, how many people even claim to have seen Jesus do miracles? 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever it is in the New Testament, whatever it is. Even claim to have seen it. But over here the claim is made that each and every Jew who was alive at that time saw it. And pass it down to his and her child, and so on and so forth. That is the concept of revelation. The revelation is based not upon faith, but upon observation. Upon observation. You know that George Washington lived. How do you know that? How do you know that George Washington lived? Did anybody here ever see Washington? No. But the next best thing imaginable. Those who saw Washington, pass it down. I saw Washington, now write it down, and so on. That's history. You can't do more than that. The only way that you can tell that someone who personally didn't see the event can believe in it is if the claim is made, we saw the event and we're passing it down to you. That's the most that can be done, and even that doesn't help. But that's the most that can be done. That's the most that can be done. Now, I mentioned before the concept of Jewish chosenness is a concept of holiness. Now, Jews weren't just chosen. We're chosen for a certain mission. Obviously to observe the Torah and so on. But what do you mean to observe it? What is the purpose of observing the Torah? The purpose is holiness. The purpose is holiness. Over and over and over and over again. Kedoshim to you. You shall be holy. That is a command. That is one of the 613 mitzvot. Kedoshim to you. You shall be holy. That's a commandment. Ikra, chapter 19. Leviticus, chapter 19. Kedoshim, it is a solemn commandment. 2 words. Kedoshim to you. You shall be holy. That's a commandment that a Jew is commanded to be holy. And over and over and over and over again, all these previous sources which I mentioned, almost all of them, chosenness was always connected to holiness. You were chosen to be holy. You will be a special people and a holy people. Am Kadosh, a holy people. Now, first of all, let's understand here 2 things, which we'll come to soon. Am Kadosh, a holy people. Judaism is not a religion. It became one after it was twisted and warped and corrupted in the exile. The Jewish people are a holy people, a religio nation. Of course we have laws to follow, but it's not a religion. We are a nation that is a specifically religious nation, a holy nation, but not just a religion, because if it's just a religion, then you can live in Austria too. And you can be, as the German Jews were, Germans of the Mosaic faith, or Americans of Jewish Americans, Americans of the Jewish faith, and so on. That's not what a Jew is. A Jew is part of the Jewish people, which is a special kind of a people, a holy people, a religio nation, a religio people. We are holy. And in the Psalms, David writes as follows. When he speaks about why God gave us the land, so he says as follows. And he gave them the lands of the nations, and they inherited the labor of the people, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. God didn't just take land from, after God took the land from people. It belonged to the Canaanite nations. They worked hard, they struggled hard, they built there, and God took it from them and gave it to the Jews, just like that. For a reason that the Jewish people should follow God's laws and be a holy nation. And again, when it says a nation of priests and a holy nation, the rabbis say, holy. What does holy mean? Hallowed and sanctified. Separated from the nations of the world and their abominations. And we'll see soon the irrevocable connection between being holy and being separate from the nations. It is not possible to be holy if you are under the influence of an unholy culture. We'll come to that soon. Let me just go into the question of what does holy mean? What's the purpose of all the mitzvot? The foundation of all evil in this world is ego. Everything bad in this world has as its source ego. Nobody robs a bank unless he's crazy, because he gets his kick out of robbing banks. Crazy people get a kick out of robbing banks. A person robs a bank because he wants money. Wants money. It's not your money. I don't care, but I want the money. Because if I have money, I'll have a car, and I'll have a good life, and I'll enjoy life. In other words, but it's not yours. It doesn't matter. Me wants money. I want money. I want money. And so I'll do things which are wrong to get the money. In each of us is I, me. In each of us. Each of us is born with me. The Bible says, Ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra min ora. For the inclination of man's heart is wicked from his birth. In other words, you see a child. A child is born, a baby is the essence of selfishness. This baby doesn't know anything except it's hungry, it wants to eat. Doesn't know, doesn't care. Its mother is busy, the mother's tired. Does not care. Me wants to eat. That's a baby. Not a baby. A baby is born a totality of selfishness. Nothing in the world matters for this baby. The baby doesn't know anything except me. I'm hungry. I'm wet. I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I'm cold. Me. The world must stop for the baby. You understand that with the baby. Problem is when people are 50 years old and they're still babies. Oh, that's the problem. That's the problem. Becoming a mature person, having a baby become mature, the essence of that is that the baby, as the baby grows up, gradually it realizes that there is something else in this world besides it. And it has to wait for its food because the mother's busy. That's called a mature child. And as a person grows older, he should, the purpose of the world is for him to take his the me, and to harness it. Now obviously, God made people with an ego for a reason. If people didn't have egos, they'd all be carpets. Everybody would step on them. A person who doesn't have a certain amount of self-respect and self-love is sick. You have to have ego. It's important, but it has to be harnessed. It has to be harnessed. The person has to have self-respect. Of course, a person that doesn't have self-respect can never respect anyone else. A person that doesn't like himself can never like anyone else. One of the great tragedies of our time is that ego is a two-sided coin. There are people that love themselves, people that hate themselves. Both things are wrong. A person should like himself. Don't love yourself and don't hate yourself. Hating yourself and loving yourself are two sides of the same coin of ego, which are bad. Because a person that loves himself and hates himself can never like anyone else. A person that hates himself is as much an egotist as a person that loves himself, because all day he sits around wallowing in his feeling, I'm nothing. All day long he thinks about himself. So there are people that think about themselves in terms, I'm great. And there are people that think about themselves, I'm nothing. But all day, both of them think about themselves and nothing else. Ego is necessary. The ego has to be harnessed. Ego has to be harnessed. And in Judaism we have a concept of ol malchut shamayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The mitzvah is a yoke. An ox. When the farmer wants the ox to go and plow a furrow, Most ox don't want to plow furrows. If you were an ox, you wouldn't want to plow a furrow. You would want to go up. You see a vegetable there, you want to eat it. So they put a yoke on it to make sure it doesn't go to the right or the left. It goes straight. And yokes are heavy things. Ask any ox, you see. Ask them. A yoke is a heavy thing. And the yoke of heaven is a heavy thing. But is it that which makes the Jew great? Because only an animal does whatever it wants to do. It's hungry, it goes out to eat. It goes out to kill, it goes out to anything. Whatever it wants, it is driven by its instincts, by its needs, by its pleasures, by its pain. It is driven by it. It doesn't control its emotions. Its emotions control it. That's an animal. In order for a Jew not to be an animal, and God knows how many two-legged animals crawl on this earth, it is incredible. In order for a Jew not to be an animal, he has to overcome his emotions. And he controls his pleasures. He controls what he wants. And he overcomes it because now is not the time for it. Consider carefully what a mitzvah does really to a person. For example, and I've used this often. For example, let's say a youngster who goes to yeshiva. He's raised in one home. Mitzvahs are. He wants to go to see a doubleheader between the Mets and the Dodgers. His mother knows something about baseball. She knows there's 9 innings, 18 innings. So she packs him enough sandwiches for 18 innings. Since she doesn't really know too much about baseball, she doesn't know that most Met-Dodger games never go 9 innings and 9 innings. No, 18 innings, 23 innings. And so the first game goes 17 innings. And he's just about finished the sandwiches for 18 innings. And there's a second game. He has no intention of leaving. But by the 5th inning of the second game, he is hungry. He is very, very hungry. And so is this big fat slob who's sitting next to him. But he has no problem. He sees the hot dog vendor coming. He says, "Hey kid, two." He goes, "Come on." And passes down the frankfurters. And now the frankfurters are passing down the lane. And the kid is sitting here, and this fat guy is sitting here, and the hot dogs are getting closer. And he can now smell the hot dog. Now, kosher, non-kosher, they both smell good. Frankfurt that's not kosher smells just as good as a kosher frankfurt. And this kid is really hungry, and he is passing down, and he now has it in his hands, and passes it on, and he knows, I can't eat because it's not kosher. Do you know what that mitzvah has done for that person as a person? To his character? To his ego? This kid is dying for hunger. And all these kids around him can, anytime they want to eat, they eat. He can't eat now. He's not an animal. He has to go above that. And you consider what that if you multiply that by the thousands and thousands of times that Jew does mitzvahs. You know what that does to the person? In terms of making him strong. In terms of of the yoke of heaven. That's what it's about. Not this nonsense. The reason why there's kosher food is because it's sanitary. The reason why we don't eat pork is because you get ringworm from it, or trichinosis from it. You get trichinosis from gefilte fish if it isn't cooked properly. It's nonsense. It isn't health reason. That's absurdity. Absurdity. If you cook pork properly, no one gets sick. Look at these hulking brutes out in Iowa. You don't get sick. Nothing to do with being sick. It has to do with a spiritual concept. With a spiritual concept of strength. And the Jew is strong. You don't have to be Charles Atlas. He isn't strong. He's not strong. I remember as a kid, used to read a comic book, this picture of Charles Atlas going in this little skinny guy is at the beach and with his girlfriend and this big guy coming and kicks sand in his face. And she says, "Oh, you coward." And she walks away and he says, "Ah, that's the end of it. And I'm going to buy a Charles." That's not strength. That's absurdity. Strength is the power within a person to overcome enormous difficulties. That's strength. And the mitzvah gives the Jew strength. It takes the person's ego and harnesses it. We don't destroy the ego. We sanctify the ego. You don't want to destroy ego, because otherwise you're left with some nebuch wimp. You want the ego, but it has to be harnessed to be at the proper time to be used, and not at the improper time. The story told, the classic story, a Hasidic story, about a youngster who was sent away to learn in yeshiva in Europe. In Europe, it wasn't like here. He was sent away. You couldn't come home every single night. You were sent away far away, and to be sent away 300 kilometers in Europe, you were sent away. And so the youngster would generally stay away for 4 months, 5 months, come home either on Pesach or Rosh Hashanah. And so he was away for half a year. Half a year he was away. And he came back. It was a stormy night, pouring rain. And he banged on the door, and the upstairs window opens, and the father looks out and he says, "Who's there?" He says, Me. The father said, Go back to yeshiva. If you after 6 months learning to yeshiva, you can still say me and expect the whole world to know it's you. You haven't learned anything. Purpose is to get rid of the me. That's harness the me, harness the I that's inside each and every person. That's the concept of kedusha. That's the concept of holiness. In the Talmud it says, this is an important concept. In the Talmud it says, everyone knows or should know, if you don't know, that the Jew each day, twice a day, says the Kriyat Shema Yisrael. And there are 3 chapters to it. And the rabbis in the Mishnah, in Brachot, ask, why do we first say Shema Yisrael, and afterwards we say the second one, Vaya im shamoa, and if you shall hearken unto my commandments? Why do you say that? And why in that order? Why not the other way around? And they answer, because before you can take on the law, the commandments, you have to take on Ol Malchut Shamayim. You have to take on the yoke of heaven. Why? Because without the yoke of heaven, the commandments mean nothing. There are countless Orthodox Jews in this world who are not religious. Countless who are mere practitioners of Jewish ritual. They practice ritual. They were born into an Orthodox home, and so that's the way it is. And certainly in this country it is not difficult to be Orthodox every day. Once upon a time it was hard. If one didn't work Shabbos, hard to find a job. Today, 5-day work week and the ADL, and everybody, and Kolpa, everything is fine. Kosher, everything's kosher today. It's not OU and OK, and KP, XYZ, all kinds of things. Everything is kosher today. It's easy to be kosher. Used to be a time for a married woman to cover her hair. Today, you have shekels that make the woman look 40,000 times better in shekel than naturally. So it's pretty easy to keep rituals today. It's hard to keep Ol Malchut Shamayim, because then there are certain laws that you will find that so-called modern Orthodox Jew simply finds difficult to accept. and therefore does not keep it. So therefore, the rabbis say, you first have to say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem. First of all, say, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That is accepting upon ourselves the yoke of heaven. If He is God, then whatever He commands, you must do. Then you can accept the commandments. The Mishnah also says, also in Brachot, there is a law in the Torah which says that if you see a nest, and the mother bird is sitting either on eggs or feeding her, newborn birds, and you want to take the eggs or the newborn birds, you must first send away the mother. You must first send away the mother. That's a mitzvah, lo hakam, sending away the mother from the nest. Now the Mishnah says what would appear to be a remarkable thing. If someone is walking along the road, he's talking with his friend about Torah and so on, he says, how merciful is the Torah. What a merciful thing it is. Look, it even has mercy upon the mother bird. You silence him and say, quiet, you're not supposed to say that. Talmud says, because he makes the laws of God merciful when they are really decrees. Now think of what that is saying. There's a tremendous concept here. How many people keep laws because they agree with them? Countless Jews keep laws because they like it. And countless rabbis will take Balei Tshuva and teach him, you see how nice this is? Like, what a nice law. I said, you're right, it's a nice law. If you decide to keep laws because you like them, what's going to happen when you come across a law which you don't like? And believe me, there are enough of them around, which go against the grain of modern man and modern woman. What do you do then? What you do then is you become a Reformed Jew. This I like, this I don't like. This I keep, this I don't keep. That's why we silence him. It may be indeed true that this particular law is a law of mercy, but that's not why you keep it. Whether it's merciful or not merciful, you keep it. It's not up to you to, God didn't write a book and then send it out to all the people. You like it? Whether you like it or don't like it, you keep it because it's truth. And you may not see it. That's because you're stupid. But if you keep it, you'll eventually see that it is right. You don't come and say, nice law. Not so nice law. This isn't some rating system. Keep the laws. Ol Malchut Shamayim is to bind the Jew, to bind his ego, and make him great. Because freedom comes from keeping laws, and not the other way around. A person that doesn't keep any laws eventually becomes a victim and a servant and a slave to his passions and his desires. And he has no way to escape it. He has no way to escape it. I hear Jews tell me, you fast all day on Yom Kippur? How can you fast all day? That's because this person really and truly cannot conceive of going more than 45 minutes without food. You can't conceive it. You mean to say on Saturday, you can't do this and you can't do that? How can you not do that? That's an animal. That's a weakness. That's a tragedy. That's a slave to himself. Person who says, not only do I fast on Yom Kippur, I fast seven times during the year. Of course I keep the Sabbath. I have the power, the strength to keep the Sabbath and give up things. And that's strength. That's strength. That's taking the ego and sanctifying it. And that's taking the animal and turning it into a human being. That's taking that little baby child that is born who is the totality of ego. Eat, I want to eat. Cry, I want to cry. Eat, anything I want to do. And from that baby comes a human being, a mature adult, rather than the millions of little infants who are 15, 16, 70 years old, who have never matured and never grown into anything more than the same infant. I want, I need, I want, my body, my life, my. That's the tragedy. These are weak people, and these are people just a little higher than the animals, if that. When God said that man should be a little lower than the angel, just a little lower than the angel. And what he really means is much higher. An angel can't do wrong. It has no capacity to do evil. An angel is programmed to do only good. The greatness of the human being is he could do evil, and he chooses to do right. That's greatness. That's greatness. That's greater than the angels. That's why the Torah was given to human beings and not to angels. Angels don't need Torah. Angels are pro. They're like a computer, some kind of a robot. It can only do the right thing. Now, I said before the concept of holiness is unequivocally connected to the concept of separation. Separation. There must be a concept of separation. And on the verse, which by the way was in yesterday's portion, you should be a nation of a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The rabbis, as I mentioned earlier, in the Mechilta, in Yitro, say, hallowed and sanctified, separated from the nations of the world and their abominations. And in Vayikra it says, chapter 20, in Leviticus chapter 20, and you shall be holy unto me, for I the Lord am holy, and have set you apart from the peoples, that you shall be mine. And that classic ringing statement in Lamidbar, in Numbers chapter 23, lo, it is a people that shall dwell alone, and shall not be reckoned among the nations. Judaism demands separation of the Jew from the nations. Because if the Jew is among the nations, he cannot help but be influenced by them. You cannot help but be influenced by them. In this country, the Orthodox Jew in America behaves like an American because he's an American. Like gamma rays, the whole culture comes at you. Newspapers and magazines and radio and television, and just walking in the streets. And so the rabbis comment on this statement, lo, it is a people that shall dwell alone. The Hebrew is hen am levadad yishko. And the word hen is translated for some reason in English as lo, as if this is some kind of a poetry. The Torah is not poetry. And the rabbis comment on why hen is used. Hen is spelled hey nun. Hey nun. The rabbis point out, in Hebrew, letters are also numbers. Aleph is 1, and Bet is 2, and Gimel is 3, and Dal is 4, and Hey is 5, and so on. So the rabbis say that if you take the number 10, and you want to put together any two letters which will combine to 10, It's not difficult. You take Aleph, which is 1, Tet, which is 9, you take Bet, which is 2, you take Chet, which is 8, 10, Gimel 3, Zayin 7, 10, Dalet 4, Vav 6, 10. But when you come to Hey, Hey only has another Hey. Hey is 5, and 5 goes together with 5. There's no other partner. Hey only has another Hey. The same thing with the number 100. You want to take 2 letters, you can take Yud, which is 10, and Sadi, which is 90, and so on and so forth. And then you take 20, and 80, and 30, and 70. When it comes to 50, Nun is 50. Nun only goes with another Nun. Nun has no partners except another Nun. That's what it says. Hen. Just like Hey only has another Hey. And Nun only has another Nun, so a Jew only has another Jew. We're separate, we're apart, we're distinct, in order to be the holy people. Because without that, we will be influenced by all the nations. And look at the American Jew. Look at the tragedy. Look at the tragedy of the American Jew. Freedom for the Jew has always been tragedy. Because the Jew can die in one of 2 ways. Through the ashes of, through the chimneys of Auschwitz, and through assimilation and intermarriage and being wiped out as a Jew. And so therefore, God did something which no other faith has. Judaism is a land-centered religion, or a religionation which is commanded to live in a particular country, in a particular land. As I said earlier, you can be a good Catholic if you live in Austria or in Australia. And you can be a good Muslim. You don't have to live in Mecca. At most, you have to visit Mecca once in a lifetime, a Hajj. Once in a lifetime. But you can live anywhere. You can live in London, or in Brooklyn, Atlantic Avenue. You don't have to live on Hajj. But the Jew is commanded to live in one specific country. In one specific country. And that is the land of Israel, and for a reason. For a reason. And the land is said over and over and over again. From the very first time that we meet Abraham, we find already the commandment to Abraham. Abraham is told, Lech lecha, get out of your home. Get out of the country in which you were born. And God speaks to Abraham and he says, Lech lecha me'artzecha. This is in Bereshit, chapter 12, Genesis chapter 12. Get thee out of thy country, and from thy people, thy kindred, and from thy father's house, onto the land that I will show thee. He didn't even know what that land was. He didn't know what that land was. He said, leave. And then he said, unto thy seed will I give this land. Eretz Israel, just as we spoke about a chosen people, there is now a chosen land. The rabbis say, the Jewish people is a special people, and the land of Israel is a special people. I will take the special people and put them into the special land. And over and over and over again. I mean, constantly. In chapter 15. God says, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates. That is the promised land. That is the promised land. The land of Israel doesn't belong to us because of Balfour. If I were an Arab, I'd be right. Who's this Englishman to come and give you my country? And he'd be absolutely right. Some Englishman sitting in London says, you know something, Weizmann, you're a good guy. I'll give you Palestine. Who's Balfour? Crazy Jews. So how about Balfour? League of Nations sits down and gives a mandate. Who's the League of Nations? The Arabs are absolutely right. Or the UN. Who's the UN to give away my country to the Jews? Absolutely right. Who's Harry Truman? We don't place our claim upon Israel. The Balfour, League of Nations, Truman, Stalin, UN. This is the claim. The Lord God of Israel gave it onto the Jewish people. Onto the Jewish people, certainly. And over and over and over again, I don't even want to have to go into it but more and more and more, but just one more, where God says to the Jewish people itself, in Dvarim chapter 11. Every place wherever the soles of your foot shall tread shall be yours, from the wilderness even unto Lebanon, from the river, the Euphrates, even unto the uttermost sea shall your coast be. The land was given to us. And the question here, debate, divide the land, separate the land. It is yours, it isn't yours, it's partly yours. There's no such thing. It is ours. It is ours. And in the Medrash, they already knew that someday the nations would come and say, you're thieves, you took the land, you're colonialists, imperialists, fascists. And so, in Breshit Rabbah, chapter 1, and this is what Rashi brings down, the very first Rashi. The Medrash says that if the nation shall come to the Jews and say, you're thieves, you took the land from the Canaanites, they shall answer, the world and all that is in it belongs to the Holy One, blessed be He. When He so chose, He gave it unto you. And when He so chose, He took it from you. He gave it to us. And this is the meaning of the verse. The strength of His deeds did He recount unto His people, in order to give unto them the inheritance of the nations. That's why it's ours. By the way, one of the rabbis commented, if the purpose is to speak to the nations and prove to them that God owns the land, why do we bring down the verse, the strength of His deeds did He recount unto His people? It should have said, the strength of His deeds did He recount unto the nations. And the answer is, no matter what you tell the nations, they're not going to care. The problem is not whether the nations believe that the land belongs to the Jews. The problem is that the Jews don't believe that it belongs to the Jews. And therefore, the verse is, the strength of His deeds shall He recount unto His people. Alavai, that Jews should believe that it belongs to them. So, let's move towards a little break here. Just a few more points. And that is, the tragedy of the Jewish people, that for 1900 years had no state of their own, and now they have a state of their own, and continues to exist in the exile, continues to live in the exile, not the slightest intention of leaving. Not the slightest intention. In South Africa, people sitting on a volcano which is going to explode. With some dually, but they go to Melbourne. Who's going to Israel? And the worst part is, there were 600,000 Orthodox Jews living in this country. Totally at home. In Borough Park, there is sheer contentment. Not the slightest comfort, not the slightest problem of conscience. Absolutely convinced that this is New Zion. In Muncie, they are building homes. $400,000 homes. $500,000 homes. $600,000 homes, in each room a chandelier. Happy, luxury, and happy, content. We're Americans. Sometimes I listen to the Bob Grant show, and I listen to these guys calling in from Williamsburg, with thick accents, Jews, thick accents. 2 minutes after he has just told off some Spanish guy with an accent, "Where you from, buddy? What are you, a foreigner?" And this fellow calls it, and he says, "God's giving it to him, Bob." He thinks that he's an American. He doesn't know Bob Grant. No, he doesn't know the anti-Semite that he is. He's a smart one. If you made $100,000 a year speaking in shuls, you'd also make believe that you like Jews. In any case, God told the Jews to live in a special country. We find in Dvarim, Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses tells the Jews, "Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments that you should do in the midst of the land whither you go to possess." And again, in the same chapter, "And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments that you might do them in the land whither you go over to possess it." The Ramban, one of the great commentators, says as follows: the Holy One commanded Moses two things, he says. One, that he should go down to save the people from Egypt. And this would have been possible in Egypt itself, or nearby. In other words, if the purpose was to free the Jewish people from slavery, free them, and let them live free in Egypt. But he promised another thing, to take them out of that land totally into the place of the Canaanites, meaning Eretz Yisrael. Why? The Ibn Ezra, in Dvarim chapter 4, verse 10, says, listen carefully. "For God knew that Israel could not fulfill the mitzvot, the commandments, properly if they would be in countries ruling over them." You hear what he said? Yes, they could keep the commandments, but not properly. Why not properly? Because you'll be influenced. You'll be influenced. The Torah was given to be in a country in which, as far as physically possible, there will be no outside influence. You'll be influenced. You'll go to public school or even in yeshiva, and you'll have to learn a certain secular curriculum. And you'll come out thinking, gee, Jefferson is great. That's the way to go. Jefferson is Judaism. Run, democracy. And then someday, some rabbi will get up and say, democracy and Judaism do not mix. And you'll say, fascist, racist. And you really believe it, because that's how you were raised. So you keep mitzvahs. Of course you keep mitzvahs. Every Shabbos he eats cholent with gusto. Of course he eats them. Of course he keeps the mitzvahs. He goes to shul every Shabbos and talks about the stock market. Every Shabbos, hey, Nixon almost beat Phoenix. Almost beat. God knew that they could not fulfill the commandments properly. And the Sforno, another one of the great commentators, also in Dvarim chapter 6, verse 21 says, "And since in our servitude we were unable to acquire the completeness directed by Him, God did wondrously to take us out and bring us into the land where we could acquire that completeness." That's the key, the completeness, the completeness. Properly, do the mitzvah properly and completely, and that can only be done if you're in isolation, and Judaism believes in isolation. Another concept that does not go over well with people who really were products of a foreign culture. And finally, just to finish with this point here, is a remarkable medrash in the Sifri in Dvarim, which says as follows: even after you are in exile, be distinguished with commandments. Place tefillin, make mezuzot on your doorposts, so that they will not be foreign to you when you return. Listen carefully to what he said. Even when you're in exile, do the commandments. Why? So that they should not be foreign to you when you return. That is the reason to keep the mitzvahs in America. You keep the mitzvahs in America because a Jew has to keep mitzvahs. And we have a classic concept that any mitzvah which is related to a person's body is anywhere, both in Israel or outside of Israel. What can the rabbis possibly mean by this? Remember to keep the mitzvah so that they should not be foreign to you when you get back. Here's a classic concept here, that no mitzvah was ever given to the Jew to be kept in the exile. The mitzvahs were only given for the Jew to be kept properly, completely in Eretz Yisrael, only there. And you should keep it in the exile because chaval mod, it's tragic. You're in the exile. So keep it so that when you get back to the place where it was originally meant to be, they won't be foreign to you. You know what to do. Is there ever a greater proof that the Jew is obligated to live in Eretz Yisrael because only there was it ever meant to observe the mitzvah? Let's take a break and then we'll go on to the next thing will be the question of Jews and Gentiles. And we're right on time. However, there will be a little change. All right? All right? Let's go. Sorry. Okay. There'll be a little change. This next session will be shorter, and the other one will be longer. We'll go from now till from 1:35 to 2:30, then have the break, and then start again at about 2:45, and go on to 4. Okay. Now let me finish with what we were dealing with earlier. What we had said earlier was that Judaism is a land-centered faith for a reason. For a reason. The reason being that God wished the Jewish people not to be influenced by outside forces and to create their own state. And Am levadad yishkon, it is the people that shall dwell alone. Isolation is a Jewish concept, not integration. That is not a Jewish concept. Isolation, to be alone, be separate, and to have a separate growth. A separate growth. You can love Gentiles and respect them. Shalom, good morning. That's that. Now, if that is so, two things follow from it. One, as I had mentioned earlier, it means that Jews are not allowed to live in the Galilee, and they should live in the land of Israel. And secondly, it implies something about non-Jews who live in Israel. And that is, what should the status of non-Jews be in Israel? I just received, where is Shireen? Where's Shireen? Shireen has disappeared. She just gave me a letter to the local Syracuse Jewish paper from an Orthodox rabbi of the young Israel there, who not only who has his share of ignorance, but worst of all, he compounds it with arrogance. The arrogance of ignorance. Shireen, that letter from the newspaper, you have it with you? Just for a second. Let me have it. I think it's an important thing. So, now bear in mind this is an Orthodox rabbi, God help us, and I'm really just part of it. He of course says that what Kehana says is terrible, isn't true. The Judaism that I know teaches that you shall love the stranger, Deuteronomy 10:19, and that you shall not oppress him, Exodus 22:20. This is the Torah ideal. Kehana advocates measures beyond moral justifiability. He wants to expel Arabs in the same way that Jews have been mistreated and expelled for centuries. The Torah teaches the opposite when it says that you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of the stranger. Agree with Kehana if you like, but do not confuse his message with that of Judaism. Now, obviously, smicha does not a rabbi make. And I think it's important to realize that this person is not the person. He is a symbol. He is a concept. Countless rabbis who really are ignorant, say the same thing. People think that the purpose of going to yeshiva is to get smicha. It's not true. The purpose is to become a scholar. Only in America did smicha become like, my son is a doctor, my son is a lawyer, my son is a rabbi. It's a profession. It's a profession. Judaism was never a profession. To be a rabbi is not a profession. To be a rabbi is to mean that someone has reached a certain level of learning and he's now going on further. One goes to yeshiva to become a Talmid Chacham, a scholar, not to be a rabbi. In any case, let's try to understand this in the context of what we were saying. Clearly, when the Torah said that the Jewish people should live in one country and not be influenced by the outside culture, it clearly meant that the Jewish people should have their own state which they control under Torah law. And that obviously means that a non-Jew has no say in what the state is. Now, this person here confuses oppression with equality. First of all, let us understand what the halakha says about the role of the non-Jew and his status. We quoted earlier the Psalms in chapter 105. That says, and he gave them the lands of the nations, and they inherited the labor of peoples, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. That's why he gave us a state. That's why he took the land away from other people and gave it to us, so that we might observe his statutes. That's the whole purpose of a Jewish people and the Jewish state. If not that, there's no reason for it. That there's no reason to be a Jew. Now, what does that mean? Can you imagine? He takes the land from the people, and then he says, now I want you Jews to build a democratic society in which the peoples can have the right to win the country back through democracy after you took it from them. First, let's look at the two kinds of non-Jews. The non-Jew who lived there originally, before the Jews took it, and the non-Jew who never lived there. And while essentially the status is the same, nevertheless, in practice there is a great difference. The non-Jew who once lived there and was the majority before the Jews came and took that land will always harbor a hatred and a desire to take his land back, unless he's a Cretan. If he's normal and he believes the land was taken from him, of course he wants the land back. And that's what the Abarbanel, one of the great, great commentators on the Torah, brings down in Shemot, in Exodus 34. He brings down on the verse which says the following: "Observe thou that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and so on and so forth. Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land that you come upon, lest it be a snare in your midst." That's the verse. And the Abarbanel says on it, listen to a normal Jew. For having taken their land from them, there is no doubt that they would always seek the harm of Israel. My little grandchild can understand that. My Syracuse rabbi can't. And he continues, "And that is why the verse says, quote, the land that you come upon," meaning, since you, Israel, came upon the land to take it from its inhabitants, and they are, quote, robbed of it, how will they observe a covenant of love? It will rather be just the opposite. For there will be a snare in your midst, and when there will be a war, they will join your enemies and fight you. What normalcy? What sheer logic? A, B, C. Of course this is normalcy. He understands that. You don't give them rights so that to make it easier for them to take it from you. And so, the halakha is clear, despite this ignoramus here. The halakha says that when Joshua went into the land, he sent three options to the inhabitants. He sent them three options. And he said, whoever wishes to evacuate, let them evacuate. You want to leave, leave. If you wish to make peace, and you'll see under what conditions soon, let him make peace. To make war, go to war and you'll die. Three choices. A war, peace under the condition that you see peace. If not, leave. Those were the conditions of Joshua. And those conditions are based upon a clear halakha. And it is important that we understand what the halakha says. First of all, the halakha is based upon, as everything else, the original foundation of it is based upon verses in the Chumash, in the Torah. In Parshat Shoftim, chapter 20, in Dvarim, Deuteronomy, it says as follows: Ki tikrav el ir yilachem aleha. When you come nigh onto a city to fight against it, and immediately stop in the middle of the sentence. The rabbis in the Sifri say on this verse, במלחמת רשות הכתוב תדבר. This is speaking about a voluntary war, and I must explain that to you carefully, and hopefully if you meet this rabbi, you will explain it to him too, since he obviously doesn't know anything. In Judaism, there are two kinds of wars. An obligatory war, one which you must fight, and a voluntary war, one which you may fight. An obligatory war, there are three kinds of such wars. The 7 Canaanite nations, Amalek, and any time that the enemy starts a war with you, any enemy. That's an obligatory war. A voluntary war is if you want to go outside of Israel, for example, and start a war. That's a voluntary war under certain conditions. An obligatory war, there are no conditions. If it falls into that framework, you must go to war, gamal, and finish. That's it. Any time, any place, no Sanhedrin, no prophet, you just go out. A voluntary war is more limited, so this is talking about a voluntary war. I mention that carefully because such rabbis of this ilk, not knowing the Sifri, not even knowing Rashi, because Rashi brings it right down there, will say, well, that's talking about the Canaanite nations. Understand that a voluntary war cannot be talking about the Canaanite nation. That is an obligatory war, period. In other words, any kind of war, even a voluntary war. That's what this is talking about. Now I'll continue. If you go to war, the first thing, V'karata elea l'shalom. You must first call out peace. See? The Torah wants peace, and this rabbi would love it. Peace. First, you must have peace. You must offer them peace. Of course, he'll jump and say, see? Yeah, you'll see what kind of peace they're talking about. V'karata elea l'shalom. First of all, you have to offer them a chance for peace, meaning surrender, as you'll see. V'ayayim shalom ta'ancha. And if they will answer you, peace, we want peace. Upatchala. And the city opens up the gates and surrenders. Now, what is the peace? V'aya kol ha'am hanimtzava. All the nation that is found in it shall be yu lecha lemas v'avaducha. They shall be tribute and servitude. Tribute and servitude. That's the peace. That's peace. Tribute and servitude. That's peace. They're not equal citizens. They don't vote. They don't sit in the Knesset. There's tribute and servitude. The Sifri, the Midrash on this verse, says the following. If they say, we accept tribute but not servitude, servitude but not tribute, you do not accept it unless they accept both. No conditions, both, or else war. Now, Maimonides, the Rambam takes down this law and he codifies it in his Mishnah Torah, in his great code of law. And he says, and he brings down the Sifri exactly what I just told you, so that you shouldn't think that I lied to you. And he says, if they agreed to pay tribute but not accept servitude, or accepted servitude but not tribute, we do not acquiesce until they have accepted both. And servitude means, he's not going to define what do you mean by servitude. I make clear to you, this is the Rambam, and here is the source. Hilchot Melachim, the Law of Kings, chapter 6, verse 1. Chapter 6, verse 1. And here is what the Rambam, and I specifically bring down the Rambam, because he is known in all liberal circles as a progressive thinker. He was a doctor, he went to college. Listen to what the progressive, by the way, it's interesting. 3 years ago was the 850th anniversary of his birth, and so Israel made it that year the year of the Rambam. That was the year that I filed 2 bills in the Knesset, word for word of the Rambam, that were both ruled racist. It's like living in hell. And here is what the Rambam, the progressive, says. And servitude means that they shall be humble and low, and not raise their head in Israel. Rather, they shall be subjects under us, and not be appointed to any position over Jews ever. If I had written this, can you, I'll bet that the High Court would go so far as to ban me. That's the halakha. This is the law. And he goes further. He expounds on it. And he expands on it in Hilchot Melachim, Law of Kings, chapter 1, halakha 4. When he says, he brings down the verse in the Torah, in Dvarim chapter 17, which says, Thou shalt not place over thyself a stranger who is not of your brethren. It's talking about a king. Thou shalt not place over that. It says, Som tasim alecha melech, you shall, which in English is translated as, you shall surely place over you a king. You shall not place over yourself a stranger who is not of your brethren. The Talmud in Yevamot doesn't learn Som tasim as thou shalt surely, because the Torah is not verses and prose and so on. Som tasim, they ask the question, why does it say Som tasim? If you know Hebrew, you can say tasim, place over. What is Som tasim? So they say this means that not only a king, but any authority which you place over you shall only be of your brethren. And Maimonides Rambam brings this down as follows. Not only a king, but the prohibition is for any authority in Israel. Not an officer in the armed forces. Not even a public official in charge of the distribution of water to the fields. And there is no need to mention that a judge or chieftain shall only be from the midst of the people of Israel. Any authority that you appoint shall only be from the midst of thy people. That is the halakha. That is clear. This ignoramus here doesn't even know that this exists. He probably went to YU, got his smicha in 4 years. I nothing against the YU. Let me finish. There are people in the Mir that also would know this either. It isn't only YU. What I said was that there are certain people in YU that go there primarily to learn Torah and also take secular courses. And then there are those that take secular courses and also go there to get smicha and get a job. The purpose of the halakha is clear. If the whole purpose of God was to tell Jews, don't live in America because their Gentiles will form concepts and cultures, so clearly he doesn't want these same Gentiles in Israel to control the country. And that's why the non-Jew has no share in the country. What he does have is personal rights. Absolute. If he agrees to accept this, then certainly he has to be treated nicely. He has to be treated properly. He has to be treated fairly. He has to be treated justly. He has to be treated just like a Jew in terms of decency. That's what the Torah means when it says, thou shalt not oppress the stranger. But there's a difference between oppressing him and making him equal to you politically. Now, the Talmud brings down this point so strongly that one wonder, I assume that he also never learned this. The rabbis tell us in the Gemara in Sota, page 34, they bring down the following. They bring down the story of how the Jews have now finally reached the Jordan River. Now, you of course know that they are not coming from west to east. They've already conquered the east bank of the Jordan. And now they're moving from east to west. So now they're about to cross over from the east bank of the Jordan, from Hussein's territory, to conquer the rest of the country. And God performs a miracle. And the Jordan River's waters stop. Now, unlike the splitting of the Red Sea, a sea is not a river. Rivers, for those people that live in cities, rivers come from a spring, and they come down. Oceans or seas are oceans and seas. So when they split the Red Sea, the waters had to stand on both sides, split, and so on. But here God merely stopped the waters from flowing from the north. And at a certain point, he stopped the water. So that south of that point, the waters flowed into the Dead Sea, and now there was dry land. But meantime, the waters kept on coming down to the point where they stopped, and that's the law of physics. Two objects can't occupy the same space at the same time. So they reached that point, and they started climbing. And so there was this massive wall, 12 by 12 miles, a frightening sight. And the Jews are now crossing the Jordan there. And the rabbis tell us, while still in the Jordan, Joshua said to them, he said, "Stop, I have something to tell you." Now, you imagine the reaction of the Jews to this. He said, "Of course, any time, but let's first cross over." He said, "No, I have something to tell you right now, and specifically for a reason, while you're in the middle of this and with this horror over you." Now, what was so important? What was so urgent that he had to tell them right now while this frightening wall is there? Shabbos? No, Shabbos is an important thing, but it wasn't that. Kosher food? Very important. Not that. Learning Torah? The most important, but not that either. The rabbis say as follows. Joshua said to them, "Know why you are crossing the Jordan, in order that you drive out the inhabitants. If you do this, it shall be good. If not, the waters shall come and inundate you and me." That is what the only thing he found it necessary to say, because he knew that if they did not do that, there would not be Shabbos, there would not be kosher food, there would not be Torah. The Jews would be driven out of their own land. That's the Talmud. That's why the Talmud is normal. That's why the rabbis once were normal. And that's why this ignoramus babbles about non-Jews. Now let me first of all go into this thing, because he's not the only one. He's not the only one. But before I do that, let me just quote to you. The Chumash in Bamidbar, in Numbers, chapter 33, brings down the following. It says, "And you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you. But if you shall not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which you let remain of them shall be thorns in your eyes and thistles in your sides, and shall torment you in the land wherein you dwell. And it shall be that I will do to you as I thought to do to them." That's the Bible. The commentators on this say the following. First of all, Rashi. "And you shall drive out the inhabitants, and then you shall inherit it. Then you will be able to exist in it. And if you do not, you will not be able to exist in it." That's Rashi. The Sforno. "When you shall," and I use the Hebrew term is liva'eh, to eliminate. "When you shall eliminate the inhabitants of the land." I would never use such a term. I'm telling you what he uses. "When you shall eliminate, kasher tivahu," when you shall eliminate the inhabitants of the land, then you shall be privileged to inherit the land and pass it down to your children. But if you do not eliminate them, even though you will conquer the land, you will not hand it down to your children. Sforno. Orach Chaim, another one of the great commentators. Not only will they hold that part of the land that you did not possess, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, but even concerning that part which you did possess and settle in, they will distress you and say, rise and get out. It is a pleasure to deal with normal people. That is the greatness of Torah. That is the greatness of rabbis when they were rabbis. This is the greatness of it. Now it's to the concept of the ger. But it says the stranger, and brings down, I'll quote you again, it's strange. It says, the Judaism that I know, pity that my 8-year-old grandson can't debate him. It's after I have gotten through with my grandson, he can debate anybody. The Judaism that I know teaches that you shall love the stranger, you shall not oppress the stranger, you shall not oppress the stranger, and so on. First of all, let us understand the Torah was not written in English. Written in Hebrew. It doesn't say stranger, it says ger. And ger is a technical term. Ger means ger. What does ger mean? First of all, even if for a moment we would assume that when it says ger, it means the non-Jewish stranger, that you should not oppress or persecute him. So that would certainly mean that if he accepts these conditions of living in Israel, in which he has no citizenship status, no political status, no national status, then by all means, we have to treat him with decency and with mercy and with respect. And then he should be treated like a Jew on equal terms in social life, in his social, not meeting with him and so on, but in his social benefits, in his economic benefits, in his cultural benefits, of course, by all means, that is the mitzvah. But he isn't. He isn't a citizen. He's not equal to the Jew so that he can take the country which God said you shall live in isolation and then change it around. But more than that, it doesn't mean the stranger, the non-Jewish stranger. A ger means a non-Jew who converted. That is a ger. A ger is a ger. It is a non-Jew who converted and who is now a Jew. And he must be treated, she must be treated, they must be treated exactly as you would treat a Jew. And the chinuch, the great, one of the Rishonim, the chinuch in Commandment 63 says, and he brings down what this rabbi brought down. And you shall not oppress or persecute a ger. We are prevented from oppressing a ger even with words. And what is a ger, he says? This is one of the nations who converted and entered our faith. I don't know how much clearer you can get. He never saw the probably. He's busy going for his PhD at Syracuse. We're playing basketball there at the stadium. At the huge
Carrier dome.
The carrier dome. See that? Carrier dome. In the Torah Kohanim, in the Medrash, in the Torah Kohanim 19, on the verse, and if a ger shall live in your land, you shall not oppress him. As an Ezrach citizen of you shall he be. The rabbis say, what does it mean as an Ezrach, as a citizen shall he be? Just as an Ezrach is one who accepted all of the Torah, so is a ger one who accepted all the Torah. I don't know how much more you have to go. It is clear to any child who learns this. The problem is this child never learned it. And then they bring down and they say, bring down the following. They'll say. The Bible says, and you shall love the ger, for you are gerim in the land of Egypt. So you see, there is, just as you are a ger, so this, meaning that just as you there were strangers, it's also talking about strangers. The greatest translator of the Bible was Onkelos. Onkelos was a Roman convert to Judaism. He was a convert. So listen to how he translates this, and you shall love the ger, for you are gerim. There were two, in this verse, there are two words ger and gerim. He uses two different words in Aramaic, one for ger and one for gerim. And he says as follows. He says, and you shall love the giora, meaning in Aramaic, convert to Judaism. But when in translating for you are gerim, he doesn't use the word giora, but he says for you are dayarim, you are residents in the land of Egypt. If any ger had a vested interest in having any kind of a stranger being treated properly, it was Onkelos, who was a convert. And yet he, the truth of the matter was, he said, you are speaking here of two kinds of gerim. One is a giora and one is a dayar. You shall treat the giora, the convert, properly, because you were dayarim, you were residents in the land of Egypt. And the final proof is, children who learn Chumash, children in Israel at the age of 4, my grandchildren at the age of 4 learn this. Children who learn Chumash know that the Paschal lamb, when it was sacrificed, a non-Jew was not allowed to eat from it. Indeed, if he ate from it, he was given the death penalty. Because the Paschal lamb is the symbol of Jewish freedom. No non-Jew is allowed to eat from it. That's a clear rule. Now, in Exodus 12, in Shemot 12, the Torah talks about the Paschal lamb. The Jews have to eat. And on the Paschal lamb it says, one law shall there be for you and the ger who grows in your midst. What kind of a ger can this be talking about if the Torah says that a non-Jew who eats from the Paschal lamb shall be killed? Obviously it's talking about a convert to Judaism. And wherever it says one law shall there be for you and the ger, it is talking about the convert to Judaism, because God knew how, unfortunately, Jews will treat converts not in a proper way. And they say, well, he's not really Jewish. Well, of course he's Jewish, but to marry my daughter, so he said, therefore, one law shall there be for you and the convert. The convert is precisely equal to the Jew, exactly equal to the Jew. But that's the convert, not an Arab. Now, that is Judaism. That is halakha. That is as taught the proper way, the truthful way, the truthful way. You don't have to be a scholar to know that. Understand? I'm a scholar, but you have to be a student of Chumash, and a couple of things in the Talmud. And and of course this is so. Of course this is the truth. The tragedy is that this rabbi here has great problem with Judaism. He has problems with Judaism. Being one who, as the Sforno said, being in countries under other people, he doesn't observe Judaism in its completeness. So he has problems with that, because he has problems with anything which is not democracy. He's not ready to accept the fact that Western democracy is not Judaism. He goes against Judaism. So we have to be very, very careful not to be ashamed of it. Not only if the Arabs would have equal political rights, would they distort the Jewish content of the state, but they would destroy the state physically. Give them an opportunity to have equal political rights, and they'll destroy the state, and they'll liquidate the state, and they'll massacre Jews the minute that they have the power. They would make Lebanon look like kindergarten. They would make the Holocaust look like kindergarten was. In the Holocaust, these Jews went quickly. The gas chambers was fairly quick. Over here will be a Holocaust of hatchets and knives. One knows Arabs. Of course, one knows Arabs. Never forget, after Black September in Jordan, a Palestinian assassinated the Jordanian foreign minister in Cairo and drank his blood on the steps. He drank his blood. That's what we're dealing with. And this yo-yo here is talking about it isn't right, it isn't ethical. Living in Syracuse, in the Carrier Dome. That's the Jew and the non-Jew. That is what we are talking about. Now, to sum up this whole thing before the break, and let me just sum up, and then we'll take questions and answers on this. Then we'll have the break, the mincha and so on. And then we'll have the next session will be on Kach, what it is doing here, Israel, where it is going, and then questions and answers again. To sum up this whole thing that we had. The Jewish people is a chosen people, chosen by God at Mount Sinai, where he appeared to the entire nation, every man, woman, and child who saw it, and made a covenant permanently with the Jewish people. That they should be a people that follows his laws, and that they should be a holy nation. And if they will be that, it will be good. If not, it will be bad. God is not some kind of a Santa Claus. Don't worry to be good. The Santa Claus. There's punishment. There's a reward. There is punishment too. There's punishment too. There is evil in this world, and one has to hate evil. And at the next seminar, please God, whenever that is, we'll go into this whole concept. All these concepts, these crazy liberal concepts of what is right and what is wrong. In fact, under liberals, nothing is wrong. The Jew is a land-centered people because God wants the Jew to be separate and holy and free of, as the rabbis put it, of the abominations of the nations. The abominations. And for that reason, therefore, the Jews should all live in Israel, and for that reason, non-Jews who want to live there must be limited to their personal rights and no political and no national rights. And that is the Jewish idea, and there is halacha, and you've been given here a great many sources. You can have smicha, at least in this area. Believe me, from this, if you took notes, and if you remembered it, you'll be able to give a real good shiur in any synagogue on this. All right, are there any questions? But just stick to this area and not to anything else. Yes.
Can I make an announcement about tonight's meeting?
Yes, you certainly can.
The rabbis will speak tonight in New Jersey, in Bergenfield.
Please God.
And please God, and we hope to have a good turnout. But if anybody here would like to join us, it's just a few miles, about 4 or 5 miles over the George Washington Bridge. We have flyers in the back. And if you want to have directions how to get there, you can speak to me or to that young lady whom I've given the directions to already.
Yes.
One could argue against your use of the psukim. I believe in Gemara Avodah Zarah Daf Chaf, the Gemara says, and Tosos says that it is applied to the Sheva Amim, even though he says to destroy them all, it is applied to them not during war. If we're not at war with them, that would apply to the would apply to them not during war.
Certainly, of course.
So he was restricting the law of Lot Hanei only to Sheva Amim and not to be extended from there.
Certainly, because if there's a question of Lo to Hanei, it means that under no circumstances could they live inside the land. What I said was that they may indeed live in the land, given these conditions. Given these conditions, they most certainly can. Though I will tell you this, that there is big machloket Rashi and Tosfos in whether the 7 nations, even if they wanted to accept these things, could, with these conditions, were allowed to stay. Tosfos says yes. Rashi says no. The Ramban apparently, in the Chumash, in Dvarim, says that there is no such a difference between the 7 nations and other nations. If they accept the conditions, then they too could stay. So he says then what is the difference between the 7 nations and other nations? The difference is that if they did not accept it, the 7 nations must be totally wiped out, and other nations only the males and so on, the adult males. So certainly this is so. You're right. Even though I must tell you that there are people that don't hold like Tosas either. Otechanei is only talking about the question of, are they allowed, for example, to own land? Or they allowed to own a house? And in the Shulchan Aruch, I do want you to know, he does not paskin like Tosas. He says that any akum, and here is a question where it says akum, whether he really meant only akum or because of the censor he put in akum, any akum. He paskin there that any akum is not allowed to own land in Israel. And there's no question about whether to rent him a house. I mean, just know that is the Shulchan Aruch. The thing is this, that we all know that the Shulchan Aruch always only brings down laws that are applicable in our time. In the Shulchan Aruch, there's nothing about sacrifice, anything which is not applicable in our time. So if he brought this down, you know he is not speaking about Canaanim. He must be speaking about nations in our time. So that's also something which is yes.
I believe this is related. Why did the Supreme Court in Israel find this to be racist?
That's not related. That will be at the second thing. You can ask it then. Let's not go into anything which involves kach. This is just the substantive questions here. Later, you can ask that question. It's a good question. It's probably one of the most basic questions possible because the answer to that question says almost everything about the state of Israel. Yes?
In the book of Joshua, don't we learn that Joshua accepted part of one of the nations?
Yes.
To basically, and he went to war to protect them.
He accepted them as permanent slaves.
And they agreed to that.
They had very little choice.
Right, it was either death or they agreed.
That's right. They had very little choice. I mean, he was a great salesman. Great pitcher. Very little choice. Yes. Yeah.
If I give these arguments to people in defense of the policy of transferring the Arabs, they can say to me, well, that's very easy for you to say from New York because you're not going to have to suffer the consequences.
Tell him I'm speaking for Kehana, and he's there. That's okay. You say, I'm telling you what Kehana says, okay? And he's there, and his children are there, and his grandchildren are there. And tell him, you're right, I'm not there, and you're not there either to tell us not to throw out the Arabs who would massacre Kehana. Maybe they want to. No, that's a bad thing. Don't say Kehana. Say someone else. Yeah.
Your comment about the type of Holocaust that takes place at the Arabs have their way.
Yes.
Was borne out only last week. I read a report in Lebanon. The Amal and the Hezbollah went to a village and they massacred every man, woman and child with hatchets and knives.
Yes, that's true. There are over 180 people massacred. That's how it is. I'm not surprised by that. What Jews should talk about is, where were all the Jewish liberals who in sovereign Shatila, when Jews didn't kill anybody, they simply didn't stop Christians from massacring. How come there is no outcry now? That says a great deal more about Jewish liberals and leftists than about Amal. Believe me. Quiet neighborhood over. Yes.
Jews had suffered galut as a punishment.
Yes.
And before each time that they returned, the Nevi'im was saying this is the time that we have to return to Israel.
Right.
So I don't think that the Nevi'im will say right now.
No. That's not true. That's not true. It's not true. Not true. First of all, it's not each time. There have only been two exiles. What do you mean each time? The first one, it was a specific time given, 70 years. And that's what it says in Yirmiyahu. God says to Yirmiyahu, 70 years, and that's it. At the end of 70 years, they went back. The second exile, the one which we are now, no time was given. Because there are no prophets there. There are no prophets. There are only losses. There are no prophets there. There are no prophets there. There are no prophets there. And the Talmud tells us that that the redemption can come in one of two ways. B'ita or Achishen. B'ita in its time, meaning that there will be a certain time that we don't know, but there will be a certain fixed time, or Achishena Harid. And the Talmud says in Sanhedrin that Zachu Achishena, lo Zachu B'ita, if the Jew merits it, if he deserves it, if he's worthy of it, he can come instantly, today. Lo Zachu, if he doesn't merit it, then it will come B'ita in its time. That's why Akiva believed that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach. Akiva was a man, not a fanatic, hot-headed Kachnik, a great rabbi. 65 years after the temple was destroyed, he already believed that it was possible for the Messiah to come. How? Because there is no fixed time in this period. It can come soon. In other words, there is a maximum time when it must come. But it can come much, much, much sooner. The Mashiach could have come at any time from the time of the destruction of the temple had we been worthy. And indeed, Bar Kokhba came mighty, mighty close. He drove out the Romans from the land. He drove out the Romans. And then he said he was overcome with his own strength and self-importance. And he said in his prayer to God, if you don't want to help me, don't help me. Just don't help the Romans. When Akiva heard that, he took his army. And by the way, the bulk of the army of Bar Kokhba were the students of Akiva. He told them to shut the Gemara and go fight. That's what the Gemara says. When Akiva heard that, he said, this is not the Messiah. We cannot win, and it's all over. But he did believe that. He was the Messiah. And how could he believe that if, as you said, there has to be some prophet to tell us? Because that is not true. There is no prophet. There has been no prophecy already since the very early days of the Second Temple. The last three prophets were in the early days of the Second Temple, and since then there was no prophecy, there was no bat kol, there was no voice from heaven, there was no Ruach HaKodesh, even though people will say that this Rebbe has Ruach HaKodesh. That's not true. No one has Ruach HaKodesh. No one has. And someone who says that so lies against the Talmud. We have what we have. The Dalet Amot Shel Halacha, the 4 cubits of Halacha. That's what the Talmud says. In the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, God has only the 4 cubits of Halacha. That's how we know what is true. You sit and you learn. Yes?
How come in Yirmiyahu, when they went through the first Galas, he says you should banu lobatim, so you should build houses, right. You should open up a business, you should open up yeshivas, because this is going to be a permanent type of...
He didn't say permanent, he said...
And put it this way, when Ezra went back 70 years later, he just had a couple of followings. The majority of everybody stayed in Babel, and that's where the Bavli and everything, the biggest Talmidei Chachamim came from Babel at that time.
True. First of all, he didn't say stay there.
No, he said, well, yeah, okay.
He said, don't try to go back before the 70 years because God said 70 years. That's it. He didn't say to stay there permanently. Not at all.
So why would he say, he said, establish yourself.
Because
this is not a temporary...
Try living for 70 years with no hope. What are you talking about? What he was saying was, don't think I can come back earlier. You're going to be there for 70 years. So build the houses because 70...
So how come they all stayed there after the
that's a different story. That's a different story. How come the Jews didn't want to leave Mitzrayim? How come the Jews didn't want to leave Egypt? How come it was the Gedolim who were the spies and who said, we can't make it, too many giants, and we had grasshoppers, and we had giants, and everything else, let's go back. So the Talmud tells us, the Gemara in Yuma, Daf Tet, Yuma, says the following. Rabbi Bar Chana, who was one of the rabbis from Babylon, from Babel, came to Eretz Israel to learn Torah, and he saw Resh Lakish, who was one of the great scholars in Eretz Israel, bathing in the Jordan. So he put out his hand to help him get out. And Resh Lakish didn't take his hand, and he said, how I hate the Jews of Babylon. Had you gone back to the time of Ezra, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, would have returned permanently. But because you didn't go back, that's why there was a destruction of the second temple. They sinned. Absolutely so. And the Kuzari, by the way, the Kuzari is the... Vilna Gaon once said that if he had to be in a place with only one sefer, with only one book, he would pick the Kuzari. Kuzari is one of the great books of Jewish thought. Huda Halevi wrote it. And in it, if you know the Kuzari, and we'll finish now. In Kuzari, the story of the Kuzari, in the Middle Ages, there was a nation called the Kuzari, the Khazars, who lived in what is now the Crimea. And the king apparently was a philosopher king. And they were a pagan people. And he wasn't happy with paganism. So he invited representatives of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism to come to his court. And he asked them questions. And he was impressed by the Jews, and he converted the entire people. The whole nation converted to Judaism. The kingdom was eventually captured by the Russians, and most of them were either killed or scattered. Though undoubtedly many of them fled to what is now Eastern Europe, and many Jews are descendants of them. They were Jewish. Yehuda Halevi decided to take this story and make an historical fiction of philosophy. And he put the king and the rabbi. The king would ask questions and the rabbi would answer. And of course, in effect, he was posing questions about Judaism and answering through the rabbi's mouth. And obviously, each question, the rabbi bats home run. Oh, you know, like it's like batting practice. Question, bingo. Until one question he puts into the king's mouth. He has just finished praising the land of Israel. And the king turns to me and says, I see hypocrisy. If Eretz Israel is such a great mitzvah, so how come the Jews don't go there? And Yehuda Halevi puts in the mouth of the rabbi, Hobishtani Hamil. You have shamed me, O king. Hobishtani. It's busha, you have shamed me. You're right. And he then, in essence, quotes this Gemara in Yuma. Had the Jews gone back, the Messiah would have come then, and so on and so on. But they didn't come back, and they preferred to stay in Bavel there, he says, with their homes and their iskehem and their businesses. You're right. They should have come back. The losers came back.
But they had plenty of Nevi'im at that time too. With anything, you don't find
not true at all.
The Nevi'im was the
first of all,
was in the court there.
First of all, the Nevi'im lived at a time when they couldn't go back yet. He was already old when Mordechai went back. The Gemara tells us Mordechai went back. Ezra went back. Nehemiah went back. They went back. Obviously, they left behind all these people. You can't simply leave behind Jews. Jews need rabbis. This was the tragedy. This was the tragedy. Okay, let's take a break. It's now 2:34. We'll take a break until about 5 to 3, and then we'll continue the next one. Okay, and Mincha, this is a very good time for Mincha, for those people who daven Mincha, for those people that don't daven Mincha. Okay, we have in this next session the general theme will be Kach and what it is doing and what it plans to do, and we'll leave a good amount of time for question and answers. Okay. Clearly, Kach is now at the crossroads. I think let me give you a little background of Kach from the time that it began, because many people really don't know how Kach began and what it underwent. I think it's very important to know events of the past, so that I think it gives heart to people to see how Kach grew. Kach ran for the first time for election in 1973, and at that time we failed by 1,200 votes to get into the Knesset. Extremely close election. We got 0.9% of the vote when you need 1% to make the Knesset. It was a real heartbreaking thing, and of course it was stolen from us blind, because we had a total of perhaps 300 poll watchers out of at that time 6,000. They stole us blind. Already then, we raised the issue of the Arabs, the transfer of the Arabs. I think it's important to, of course, realize that I was extremely popular in Israel when I made Aliyah in 1971. JDL had a very, very tremendous name in Israel. In general, people like us for the things that we do elsewhere. And in Israel, there was a great pride that he was a Jewish group standing up, tough, and doing all the things. And there were editorials for me and articles for me. It was a tremendous thing. I mean, when I came to Israel, in fact, within 2 weeks, the Likud, which at that time was called Gachal, met with me, and they offered me a safe seat in their list if I were to run. Of course, I said, well, if I ran, would I be allowed to say what I feel? I said, there's party discipline, there's a party discipline, and you can't just say what you want, which is, of course, true. So I said, okay, I don't want to run. Forget it. I'm not going to. The government, of course, was already, the labor government, at that time was a labor government, was already against me because of the Soviet Jewish issue. And for whatever their reasons, there was a special cabinet session which condemned the JDL for its violence and so on, which led to a tremendous counter-offensive on the part of many, many people in Israel. Who, in fact, there was a special press conference of some of the leading Soviet Jewish activists at that time, Sperling and Kazakov and other people. And they said at the press conference, and I have the news on it, that the reason why we are in Israel is because of God. Well, naturally so. That's how things were. After the 1973 campaign, I spoke at the University of Haifa. At that time, I was still allowed to speak. And I spoke about the need to remove the Arabs. Well, that's when the first change began. The cabinet held a special meeting to state that I was not speaking for the government. No, as if I was saying that I was speaking for the government. And I remember that Friday, all the weekend papers come out, of course, Friday. That Friday, all the papers, I mean, top to bottom, right and left, attacked the idea. I mean, bitterly attacked the idea. Bitterly attacked the idea. It's insanity and so on. It isn't moral, it isn't ethical, it isn't this. The years that followed were years of many, many arrests. Many arrests. In Israel, they can arrest you for no reason. And you can be held for 48 hours. And then free. Or you can be held for 48 hours and then charged. Or you can be held for 48 hours and then you come to the judge and say, we have here secret information which we ask you not to show the defendant. And then they ask that you be held for up to 15 days more. And usually this so-called secret information is a captain in the police writes to the sergeant, we have reason to believe that Kehana is going to bomb Shamir's office. And the judge was, really? In the meantime, you don't know what they're all going on clucking about. That's weird, because there was no habeas corpus in Israel. There's no habeas corpus. And these were years of, they raided our office, seized our files, I was arrested every 2 weeks, just like that. So I got used to knowing that at 10:30, if I heard footsteps on the stairs, I know that I had a special bag packed. I already learned what one needed in the lockup, and so on. And so that's how the thing went. We had no members, but very, very, very few members because members were afraid. They were afraid to get arrested. A lot of supporters, very, very few members. No money. So in the 1977 election, we ran and were decisively defeated. I mean, we lost. I tell you, it was, when we do things, we do well. We really lost. I mean, it was a pretty stunning defeat. We got about 4,000 votes. It was pretty bad. That was of course the year that Menachem Begin won. So that also played a very, very, very great part in our lack of votes. Things got much, much worse, and things, oddly enough, got worse under Begin. And I was arrested several times, and this time not for a lockup. This time I was arrested once for 5 months, once for 3 months, once for 31 days, and solitary, and so on. And Kach, oddly enough, I mean, we didn't realize it, but Kach was making its impact. You know, it's hard to realize. And therefore, I think from that, when you argue, or when you hand out flyers, or when you do these things, it may appear to you that you're not getting anything. That's not true. That's not true. You have no idea what a flyer does. You have no idea. You go to a dinner, and you hand out flyers there, and 500 people are sitting around waiting for dessert and reading it. And half of them are thinking to themselves, right, right. They're not going to say it. They're thinking to themselves. And you made an impact here. You have sown a seed. You've sown a seed. Don't think that you have to wait for someone to jump and say, you're right. Not true. People don't do that. People don't do that. People read things carefully and slowly, and they become closet supporters, which is okay. The more people in the closet, the better. And they were difficult times. We kept talking about the Arab issue, and they kept calling us racist and so on. We also were the first ones to seize houses in Hebron. We seized Beit Hadassah in 1976. And I was arrested for that. And then we seized it again in 77, Purim time. And there was gas on us. There was tear gas on us. And we arrested again. And then I was served with an order barring me from Hebron. I wasn't allowed to leave Hebron in 1978. And I tore it up, and I entered Hebron, and I went to jail for 3 months. But in the meantime, things were moving, and we didn't even realize it. Things were moving. Then in 1980, of course, I was arrested for 9 months on administrative arrest, in which there was no charge and there's no trial. And that was, of course, I must say, a bit of a shock. That was the first time that any Jew had ever been arrested under that kind of order. And that was really a shock. I remember I was surprised. I told the police that came, I said, "There's an arrest. Jewish," and they were shaking. I mean, you could see them shaking. In any case, I was there for 9 months in Kelly Romley, in Romley prison. And in the meantime, the Yamit thing began. And we went to Yamit, and Kach made a tremendous name for itself in Yamit. We were the ones there were 48 bunkers there. And we said to the people that were running it and were vowing never to leave, we said, "What, are you crazy? If you stay in the houses, then they're going to come and knock down the houses. Let's go into the bunkers." 48 bunkers. Hard to knock down bunkers. I mean, these were solid walls. Of course, they didn't want to take the bunker, so we seized one bunker, and sure enough, we were the last ones out. We were the last ones. They knocked down everything except this bunker. It took them days. They finally drilled this huge hole with a huge drill. It was like some dentist drill. Huge drill. And then they pumped water into it. And then they sent in the anti-terror squad, the elite squad, and that was that. But Kach, without our knowing it, was gaining a tremendous name in many ways. One, that these guys are Gvarim, and they're men. In Israel, the greatest compliment is, they're Gevels, he's a man. It's a macho country. Give you know. So one thing, a give. And secondly, we got a reputation which in Israel is a rare thing. Honest people. An honest person in Israel is a rarity. Like a Diogenes, one goes around with a lantern looking for an honest man. We had a name as an honest party that simply did not compromise. Anshe Emet, people who were truth, didn't compromise. And that, you'll see, eventually served us in good stead. So we ran in 81, again, having lost twice, and this time we lost again. This time we did a little better. A little better, which is a surprise for a two-time loser to do better. A little better. And then finally in 84, we ran and we won. To the shock and the dismay, you had to be in Israel election night to see this. And it was, they were supposed to give the projections, the final projections of the results at 10 p.m. And at 10 p.m., the announcer comes on the television, and you see, he really does look pale. I mean, he really looked pale. And he said there will be a slight delay. We're rechecking them. And I said to people, we want to see it. We want to see it. We want to see it. That's why this thing is up. It came on about 20 minutes later, and he really looked sick. The whole list he said, this and this, and at the very end he said, it would appear that Kehana has at least one seat. At least one seat. Now I know we eventually later I knew we had won a second seat for sure, and they robbed that. That was two. We only lost by 4,000 for the second seat. And we really didn't have, we had barely 10% of the polling places. Of 8,000, we had only about 800 polling places. Nevertheless, we won a seat. For the next hour on Israel TV, nobody spoke about the Likud, right? Everybody was babbling about it. It can't be. But indeed, it was. So the lesson from that is, you never stop trying. We were 3-time losers. The 4th time we won. You never stop trying. And above all, you don't change your platform in order to win. We did not change anything. We kept the platform, despite all the advice of all my friends and so on. And I recall very, very, very well, when I lost in 1977, I was walking in the street, I was pretty much down, and I met Dr. Yosef Burg of the NRP. And they had just won 12 seats, which was their absolute maximum at the time. 12 seats they won, and he was in an expansive mood. So he saw me and he took me around and he said, Kehana, your problem is you're not a politician. You have to learn how to. And naturally, eventually, they dropped to 5 seats. And had we run, we would have 10 seats. Without changing anything. Without changing anything. Without changing a word. We kept the same exact plan. In the 4 years that followed, we went every night to rallies. Now, you have to realize that nobody in Israel does that. Knesset time, they go to rallies and so on, and they hold rallies in the center of town. We went into every little hole that was never visited by a Knesset member. Every development town, every shchuna, every neighborhood. People never went to shchuna. Begin never went to a shchuna. They went into the kikar, the center of the town, spoke there. We went into every little neighborhood. And people appreciated it. They're coming to us. They're coming to us. And eventually, what happened was, these rallies turned into love fests. I mean, love. You know what love is? It was incredible. Because we were saying the things that everybody was thinking. About that, that line in our speech was always the line that always brought the most, right. When I would say, אני אומר מה שאתם חושבים. I say what you think. It's true. It was true. It was true. Our support at that time was still overwhelmingly from Sephardic Jews. Overwhelmingly from Sephardic Jews. But you began to see already an interesting change. An unprecedented thing. A religious party suddenly getting huge amounts of non-religious votes. Now, in Israel, that does not happen. Half a religious person never voted for Agudat Yisrael. No, or Mavdal. They don't do that. The only non-Orthodox Jews that vote for Mavdal are Arabs. And it isn't a joke. It's a joke. They go out and they bribe. All the parties bribe. All these Zionist parties get votes in our religion. They bribe them. It's that simple. And we began. Of course, we were met already with a boycott. Won the election in August 84. The state authority, the state broadcasting authority, put out a policy statement that Kehana would not be allowed to appear on television and radio. And Navon, the minister of Education, announced that I would not be allowed to appear in schools. And the university presidents met to announce that I would not be allowed to appear on campuses. So, well, what we did therefore was, we decided to go to the people. And that's what these rallies were. Now, you have to bear in mind that 2 rallies a night add up to a lot of rallies in a month, in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years. I shook the hands of well over 100,000 people. That's a tremendous thing. Now, nobody in Israel ever did that before. And while there was a total boycott on these things, the Minister of Police, Balev, had on his desk every morning a report on how many people appeared at Kehana's rallies the previous night. And he issued a statement finally saying it's an unbelievable thing. He says this is a tremendous danger. He says tens of thousands of people show up. So for a while they tried to hold up our permits. You cannot hold a rally in Israel, unlike here. Over here, you want to hold a rally, hold a rally. In Israel, you need a police permit. And you have to give 5 days notice before, and you have to do all kinds of things. And then suddenly they would start saying, we have to bring an ambulance and fire equipment in case there's... In case we, of course, showed up without the ambulance, and they broke up the rally, and we called the police, and finally they, for some reason, gave in eventually. And we started to gain. That's what led to the call for an anti-racist bill. And eventually the anti-racist bill was passed. Nevertheless, with an amendment which we were convinced would save us. The amendment was under pressure of the Orthodox parties who got frightened. If you're going to ban Kehana, next is us. So they insisted on an amendment, which stated that anyone who bases his words or his writings upon Sifrei Dat, any books of faith, religious books, or to preserve the Pulchan Dat, the ritual of Dat, religion, shall not be deemed racist. It was great, tremendous. I voted for the bill. I'm all for that. Because everything that we said was based on that. So, as election time came in '88, despite what was clear to the press, all these huge crowds coming out, And nevertheless, the official polls showed me with 1 to 2 seats. So, Chadashot, which is one of the afternoon papers, it's kind of a maverick paper. It hates me anyhow, but it's a maverick paper against the establishment. They decided something's wrong here. Something is wrong here. There's all these people coming out with 1 to 2 seats. There's something wrong here. So they decided not to have polls. They're not going to ask people for whom to vote, because they suspected that on the one hand, people who were going to vote Kach were afraid to tell it to a stranger. And on the other hand, there was some hanky-panky with the actual pollsters. So they decided to do something else. They decided to place an actual ballot box in a different city every single week, and have people vote. There'll be actual ballots of all the parties, and have them vote. This way, nobody sees what. And he said, "Let's see that." And in city after city, whether it was a Likud city, a Labour city, we began to get 8%, 9%, 12%, 15%. And they used to, after every single Friday, they would publish the results. And they'd say, it's a disease. It's spreading everywhere. Stop them quickly. Eventually, after 12 weeks, we were averaging 10.2%. Now that is just a little over 12 seats. 10.2% in their polls. It wasn't a scientific poll. Nevertheless, if you talk about 12 seats, so it's not a scientific, so it's 8 seats. In the end, we of course saw that it would have been closer to the 12 seats than the 8 seats. And of course, when we ran, so then a headline story sort of broke that Shamir and Peres had met and decided to get together and ban Kach. Of course, furor and uproar over it. And then they released a poll, a private poll of Likud, which showed us getting 7 seats in their poll. And a private poll of Labour, which showed us getting 8 seats. And among the 8 seats, 3 seats from Labour voters. Panic them. And so it was decided that they would ban us. And I don't want to go into a long story. We were banned. Now, the question was asked before, how could the High Court ban it? It says. Sue. The High Court was determined to ban us. What we were to them was the most dangerous threat to their sanity as Westernized Jews. The most dangerous things imaginable. On the day that they banned us, and they did not ban the pro-PLO party, so people were upset. There's nothing to be, there's nothing strange about that. That party in no way threatened them. That party in no way threatened them. It was a party which, it's a PLO party and so on. We threatened them with our ideology. We were going on talking about the contradiction between Western democracy and Judaism and Zionism and so on. It was a tremendous fear for them. That's why it was a unanimous vote, including one judge who was a religious judge. Menachem Elo, a religious judge, who joined in stating that that some of my bills, which went to ban intermarriage, were similar to the Nuremberg laws. For a religious Jew to say that is unbelievable. We presented some 400 pages of documented sources in Judaism for everything that we said. They didn't even look at it. Because they were determined to ban us because we were a threat to their sanity. To psychological stability as democratic Jews, as Western culturalized Jews. So that's where we stand. We're banned. The Koch party was banned from Russia. Since then, of course, we obviously didn't stop having rallies. And our rallies are just as big, if not bigger, than ever before. And our support is certainly greater than ever before. Because added to those people that really backed us, a large number of people who were really furious at what was done. Really, really angry. So the support is out there. The question arises, what do we intend doing? Do we plan to run again or not to run again? But first of all, before I get into that, I just want to touch briefly on the Koch project for a second state. And this is, of course, the new flag. This is the flag, and you can see that it was done with a purpose. The menorah is supposed to represent that this state will not only be a state of Jews, but a much more Jewish state. And that's Judaism. The lion, of course, is the symbol of Judah. That was the symbol. Every tribe had its own symbol, and the lion was the lion of Judah. And that is the verse in the Torah, Hur al-Yehuda, Judah is a young lion. That's the verse from the Torah. And we thought it important to bring on the flag a verse from the Torah, so as to bring it together. Now, a week ago Wednesday, 10 days ago, the first Congress for the Jewish state of Yehuda was held. Originally, it was to have been held at in Kiryat Arba, but the army banned us. The army put pressure upon the local council, and even though we have two members on that council, but it was voted 7-2 to have the thing banned. And so it was held at the Sheraton Plaza in Jerusalem. And I must say, it really was, it was a classy, it was really a classy thing. We did not let the Sheraton Plaza down. We performed up to their expectations. It was really first of all, the place was packed. There was an army of news people there, an army, which only makes it more incredible at the blackout of the event that was in this country. There was CBS, and there was NBC, and there was ABC, and there was CNN, and there was Time, and there was Newsweek, and there was everything you can imagine. It was BBC in French and Japanese. Everything was there. And more important, we managed to get delegates from a quarter of the settlements, which is much more difficult than that sounds, because they were being threatened, first of all, by the police. The Attorney General, Harish, immediately stated, as soon as we announced this plan, that he was looking into whether this was incitement to mutiny. So obviously, if you're an old-time Koch person, I mean, anytime the Attorney General makes such an asinine statement, so you want him. That's not. But if you've never been arrested, so the thought of being arrested is a little bit frightening. So people were afraid, and people did cancel, and so nevertheless, we managed to get a quarter of the settlements, which was good. The other reason why it was difficult was because the leaders of Gush and Munim all came out against it. Obvious reason, because they didn't think of it. So, and this is a tremendous tragedy. So even if they were against it, be quiet. After we're fighting for you, we're on the same side. Why must you attack it? That's the way it is. If you want to know why the Second Temple was destroyed, that's exactly why. Jews incapable of being together even when they're on the same side. Because the question is, but I want to be the boss. Now, not that we invited them all to participate. We sent letters to every Gush Eminim leader, all of them. Come on in. It's not a Kach project. We thought it out. So we're pushing it, but come on in. Nobody came. Nobody. It was a huge success at the Congress. What we did was we first elected a provisional assembly for the new state and an executive. We did not declare the state. We declared our intention of declaring the state if the state of Israel will decide to move out of the territories. But in the meantime, we are creating the whole infrastructure of a state so that it'll be ready, everything will be set in place to be put into effect if, God forbid, we need it. And of course, our major purpose is not to create a state. Our major purpose is to pressure Israel into annexing the territories. We don't want two states. We want one state over all of Eretz Israel. But if there won't be one state, then there will be two Jewish states to guarantee that there will never be one Palestinian state. It got a tremendous amount of positive coverage in the settlements, even among voters for Tchiyah and so on and so forth. Because somebody was doing something. Now, I want you to know that we came up with this idea in 1975. I saw in 1975 the possibility of giving up the territories, and I said, then let's start now. But as with all things, it's an idea has to have a time, the proper time, and it wasn't the proper time. People couldn't see it. They couldn't see it. What can you do? More and more people saw it now. Plus, now there was a Kach movement. And now we had a little money and a lot of people. And so it's come into being. Right now, and from now on, there's been nothing of great drama. We are busily creating the infrastructure of a state. A census, which will lead to an election within six months, and the election of a permanent assembly and a permanent executive, and the establishment of shadow ministries, finance, and all the rest. All the rest. We are creating the infrastructure, including defense. Now, defense, of course, is the most sensitive area because we have to be extremely careful with that. That's what the left is looking for. So clearly, there will be no confrontation with the Israeli army ever. That's what they want. No confrontation. No confrontation. But every settler has a weapon. And therefore we will build, just as the Haganah built the semi-para-military force under the British, we'll build this everything is legal. The weapons are all legal for defense. And we'll slowly build this paramilitary group to be ready if Israel should decide to leave. The question of, well, won't the army try and drag out the Jews? There's a tremendous difference between Yamit and Judea and Samaria. Tremendous difference in many, many ways. First of all, in all of the Sinai, there were less than 3,000 Jews. And the other Jews could not get there. It was far away. There were only two roads leading there, and both roads were blocked by the army. Judea and Samaria already has 65,000 people living in it, plus that it is surrounded by Israel. And 100,000 Jews will pour into that area to make sure that it's not given up. It's just physically impossible for the army to pick up 150,000 people. Nobody is going to fight the army. They simply won't go. You won't go. The army, who knows how many people it takes to pick up one person that doesn't want to go. To pick up 150,000 people, you need God knows how many soldiers. And furthermore, when they pick them up and they bring them across the green line and go back, the person picks himself up and goes back again. So that's why the government is so tremendously worried about this. And that's the state of Judea. Second thing, and this is the most important thing, and this I want you to listen to very, very carefully. Very, very carefully. Can Kach run again? I don't know. I don't know. We'll make the necessary changes, the name, and so on and so forth. But dealing with the mafia, who knows? Who knows? We may make every change possible. Say, doesn't matter. It's the same group. No one, if there was law in order, good, we know what the law is. There is no law. There is no law. Whatever the judges think, that's it. So, I don't know. We, of course, will make the necessary efforts and everything and so on. But, I want to tell you this carefully and listen carefully to this. The state of Israel is in a state of immense collapse at this moment. The country is falling apart. And the government is preparing to make deep concessions. The release yesterday of this terrorist is a collapse before pressure. Faisal Husseini is not some moderate Arab. He is one of the leading members of the PLO, and this pressure to free him has been going on for months and months and months, and he has been freed. And Rabin stated, I'm freeing him in the hope. What does Rabin, when he says Krishma every single night before going to sleep, what does he hope? And he says, in the hope that he will persuade the Palestinians to hold elections on the West Bank. I sit there be hoping that the man dies before he can do that. Shamir has agreed to elections on the West Bank. Do you understand what that means? Do you begin to understand what that means? Let's assume that the Arabs will agree to it. And believe me, our only hope now is the Arabs. That they say no. That's our only hope. Our only hope. The only hope of saving the Jewish people is the Arabs. Our only hope. That they'll say no on the pressure of principle. Hopefully. On the other hand, they may get smart. If they vote, the PLO will sweep every single city. Will sweep every single city. The PLO clearly represents the Palestinians, of course. What will be then, the PLO and the whole world will then get up and say, all right, Israel, you sponsored the election. You allowed the election. There were free elections. And the PLO won. The PLO, so you have to speak to them. And these are people who aren't, this isn't Arafat, these are people who are indigenous to the territory. What can Shamir say then? What can this little dwarf say? Mind-boggling. He has also agreed already to an international conference under the auspices of the UN. For 3 years, Schultz kept flying to Israel, and Shamir kept sending him back to Mrs. Schultz. No, never, 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 never. And suddenly, yes. Of course they're giving in. Of course they're giving in. What I said at the speech last time, a week ago Thursday, when Moshe Aaron spoke to the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Knesset and said, we don't necessarily hold to long-standing positions. We are not a stone wall. Well, everybody heard what he was saying. Everybody heard what he was saying. What is he talking about? Long-standing positions. We know what that means. Opposition to this and opposition to that. It's not necessarily so. And Shamir said essentially the same thing in speaking to soldiers the same day in Shechem. He said we'll have to find a way between what our heart desires and what our head tells us we have to do. Suddenly you have to do. For years and years and years you were saying nobody tells us. And suddenly, yes. They are preparing concessions. And the country is falling apart. and you have a growing number of people inside Israel who are diseased minds. And when a person can get up in Israel and say that we have to prepare the glass cages in which we will sit when they put us on trial for what we did to the Palestinians, this man is sick, he's diseased, but when he is cheered, you know that he is joined by a whole host of diseases. And when the next day is put on television so that he can say it again, so that more people can hear it, and on radio so that even more people can hear it, then you know that the country is diseased. You have a group such as Yesh Gvul, which hands out booklets to soldiers telling them how to avoid the army, how they don't have to serve beyond the green line. You understand what is happening there? The country is falling apart. And it's Shamir's fault. It isn't the left. He allows this intifada to go on for 15 months. What does he expect? This poor soldier, he doesn't know what he's doing, why he's here. He isn't allowed to put it down. His hands are tied. So he has to beat up and shoot every single day, and he doesn't want to. Of course it's Shamir's fault, and the Likud's fault, and Paris' fault, certainly. And so people really feel guilty. And so that's why more and more people are just dying to run away from Israel. They want to leave Israel. Hundreds of thousands want to leave Israel. They want to get away. They want to flee the country. The country is falling apart. So now try and understand why. You know, God does things in His own way. And I thought to myself, why were we there? Of course you had the evil ring there. Why did God allow us to go there? Maybe we didn't deserve it. That's the reason. And maybe there was a better reason. Think about it carefully. Maybe God saved us from our own delusions and saved us for the Jewish people. What would have happened had we run? We would have won 10 seats, 11 seats, 12 seats. And we would cheer. We were the third largest party in the Knesset. What would have happened next? The Likud and Labour would have gotten together. This time, immediately. Not in 51 days, in 1 day. Stop Kehunah. So we would be in the Knesset, 10, 12 seats. Frustrated. And they would this time stay together for 4 years. This would be the kind of unhappy wedlock that is really, really locked. They would stay for 4 years. You know what they can do to Israel in 4 years? And let's say that Israel would still be, weaving and wobbly after 4 years, and we ran again, and we got this time 30 seats, because the people were saying, rock on 30, 35 seats. They'd get together again. Therefore, I want to tell you, the only hope of Israel is to somehow put an end to this whole system and have a strong government take over. Now listen carefully. Obviously, the answer is for the people to get up and overthrow the government. But you don't say that. For 2 reasons. One, they won't do it. Secondly, if you think I sat for a long time in 1980, wait till you see this. So you don't say that. And I never. I haven't said it. I haven't said it. You don't say that. But what you do is, you begin to put it subtly into the minds of the people. Under the slogan, take your fate in your own hands, which can mean anything. We are going to demand, now we won't get it yet, but we're going to demand a referendum. We're going around and signing up hundreds of thousands of people for a referendum, which will call for the dispersal of the Knesset and elections within 30 days, in which groups that run must be committed to a platform of 5 basic points. 1, the putting down of the Intifada immediately with every means necessary. 2, the annexation of the territories, so that we will put an end to this nonsense that there are only 2 choices: a Palestinian state or a continuation of the occupation. There are not 2 choices, there are 3 choices. The third choice is a just choice, a Jewish choice, a Jewish state there. Israel, not Judea, Israel. 3, a choice given to all Arabs to remain in the country with personal rights and no political rights, or leave the country. 4, a total change in the economic system, free enterprise, tear down the Histadrut, make it a trade union only. That is its function. Sell off Kur and Solil Boneh and Eged and all the rest. And bring in free enterprise, capitalism, bring in private capital. Let the country become normal again. Throw the bureaucrats into the sea, one by one. And 5, a basic change in the educational system of Israel, to give young Jews the kind of Jewish pride and Jewish knowledge, Judaism, Zionism, that they lack totally today. Any group that is willing to run and accept those platforms and promise to implement them will run. In the election, one party wins, no coalitions. One party wins. The leading party gets the government, and it gets the government for 4 years. Now, for 4 years, nobody can do whatever you want. 4 years, implement this program. In World War II, 1939 to 1945, 6 years, Britain froze democracy. There were no elections in Great Britain for 6 years. Because there was a crisis, and Churchill said, what kind of election? What are you, crazy? Hitler's bombing, Hitler's this and so on. What kind of elections? 6 years, there were no elections. That's what Israel needs. Now, no one here is calling for an overthrow of the government. What we are calling for is the people to go and vote and decide. We want them to go to a referendum. We're the people. We are the ultimate authority in this country. We want to forget the Knesset on this issue. We want to go back to Vermont or Athens. The people are going to vote. No more on this issue. No delegates. No representatives. We personally want to vote on this. If it should go through, it'll save Israel. Less than that, nothing is going to save the country. This mafia there has the country by the throat. And they'll never let us run. They'll never let us run. In Yediot last week, there was a news item about the Mossad had been planning to shoot me several months ago when I was still running. No question about it. These are people who are capable of doing anything. Anything. They have done it already. People who turned over Jews to the British. People who shot Jews out the Lena. People who did what they did to Sephardic Jews. They're capable of, people who kidnapped Yemenite Jews. They're capable of doing anything. Anything at all. That's why this is the only hope of Israel. Now we have to do this cleverly, and we have to do this smartly, but this is the only way. And know that. And know that. And now that this project of the state, in which we poured in a lot of money in Israel, over $10,000 to make this thing go, now that it's moving normally on its own, this next thing will be the big project in Israel. And we've created, I don't know if I have it here, Izzy made up a 4-page little, a 4-page brochure on this. And that is going to be one of the major pieces of literature that Kach has. It's a controversial thing when people will. You must understand this yourselves, and above all, you must agree with it. You must agree with it. You have to study it and see why it is so necessary. Otherwise, there's no hope for the country. There's no hope for the country. We have already today whole areas inside Israel which at night time Jews will not go to. Jews will not enter more and more parts of Israel. You cannot enter the old city of Akko at night. Jews are simply afraid. Whole areas of the Galilee, Jews will not go there. The army has to build access roads around our villages in the Galilee. Their confidence grows and grows and grows, and their hatred grows and grows. That is the reality of Israel today. They must be saved from themselves. They must be saved from themselves. So that is the project we have. Okay, now it's 3:54 until 4:30, over 35 minutes. Any question? And now any question that you want. Yes.
Yes, you mentioned that the leaders of Gush Emunim refused to participate in the State of the project.
Yes.
It's a well-known fact that Rabbi Tzvi Cook, Zichrono Livracha, publicly endorsed you for the Knesset
Twice.
for re-election.
Twice.
Now he was the spiritual head of Gush Emunim.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be a good idea to publicize the fact that he endorsed you to Gush Emunim?
We publicized it on the anniversary of his death at Merkaz Rav Kook. He had a big, huge thing. We handed out copies of his letter, saying that Rabbi Kehunah should be elected to the Knesset. He is the man that will save the Jewish people, and so on. Twice, plus a picture of Rav Kook and myself in his sukkah. He never took pictures with anybody. Never.
And they still wouldn't believe it?
They said that he was probably senile when he did that. Ad kedei kach, as they say in Israel.
You have to see the picture.
Yes, they said he was senile. That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy about their own rabbi. Yes.
It was on the night of December 9/10 that Israel sent a landing force into Lebanon to destroy a certain underground base.
Right.
And 4 soldiers became detached from the main force because the communication system had broken down.
Right, and they left.
And instead of the normal thing of having a detachment remain there to try to get them, they pulled out completely, and then they sent in a massive amount of helicopters completely exposed to Arab fire. Unfortunately, they saved these boys, but it was very strange for doing it that way instead of the normal military way. Dan Shomron, when interviewed, said that he did it for military as well as political reasons.
Right.
Could you expand on that political reason?
I have no idea. I have no idea what he meant. Any more than I have any idea what he meant when he said it's impossible to put down the Intifada. He should have been fired on the spot. I'll put it down in 2 days. What do you mean it's impossible to put down the Intifada? And when he said because it stems from nationalist reasons, he should have not only been fired but put on trial and court-martialed. I don't know. I have no idea why this man is allowed to stay chief of staff, or Mitzna is allowed to stay the head of the Central Command. A man who has made... Mitzna is a man who, during the Lebanese war, after Sabra, Shatila picked himself up and went home to his kibbutz. If a private would have done that, he'd have been court-martialed on the spot and given a year in jail. He was given the job of the Central Command. I don't understand Shamir. I don't understand Sharon. I don't understand any of these people. You ask me to explain? There are certain things which, the moment that you can begin to understand what they are doing, you're in big trouble. Yes?
What's the story with your American citizenship as of now?
Citizenship as of now, the State Department as of now claims I am not a citizen. I claim I am a citizen. State Department says, take us to court. We have taken them to court. They're in district, we are in federal district court in Washington now. There is no date yet set for the hearing. In the meantime, the State Department has refused to allow me into the country normally. I'm here in this country. They have agreed it may be a face-saving device. I hope it's so, because in that case, I'll get it on a regular basis. I'm here for consultation with my attorneys. And that's it. Now, it does not look good. It does not look good in district court. Nevertheless, it hasn't been, the hearing has not been held. And after this district court, there, of course, there is the Circuit Court of Appeals. And after that, there is the Supreme Court. The problem is, will they, if I should lose in district court, will they allow me into the country while the appeal is being heard? And the appeal can take a good 2 years. That is the problem. I have no idea what they will do. Therefore, that's where it stands right now. Now, it is clear that Israel's hand is in this. This is not just America. Because when I was fighting my original case, which I won back in 86, when I was fighting that then, they allowed me in regularly under a C of I, which is a document which is given to people who claim that they are citizens and they're fighting it in the court. They have not given me the same thing now, and the difference has got to be Israel. So that's where it stands now, and we'll see. Yeah, any other question? Yes.
Wouldn't this be a perfect spot for that little jerk Shamir to tell the State Department and the world that Kehana has taken over Judea and pit you against Arafat and him to say, what can we do?
No question about that. There is no question that if he was smart, he would say, look, what do you want from me? I'm ready to give it up. But look at these crazies. I can't fight them. You want to fight Kehana, that's all. But for that, you have to be smart, and you also have to have kind of courage and faith necessary. And above all, you have to not be afraid that if you do that, Kehana will then pick up in the next election 40 seats.
But then you won't have all dead Jews around. What about your grandchildren and mine?
Well,
Shamir's
listen, look, it is not easy to get people to do smart things. Let me give you an example. Many years ago, when JDL was running on bombing Russians, I met with the president of the American Jewish Committee, who at that time he had a big insurance firm in Newark. I forgot his name. And until I got to, of course, meet him and so on, and he was afraid to meet me. He finally agreed to meet me in his office. And I said to him, look, let's work together. Meaning 72% of the votes go down the drain. In Israel, it's not based on district system. It's based on the number of votes cast. Every, let's say, 20,000 votes is a seat. No votes are wasted. Not so much fairer system. It also leads to a weak government, because there are many more parties. So if you talk, we're talking about the existing days is to limit democracy for the sake of a more stable government. I'm not dealing with that. Neither system. We don't have the luxury of being able to afford either system. Israel today needs a strong government, a tough government which is free to do what has to be done. And it can't have that unless the people demand this kind of strong government under this program and give them 4 years of free hands to get the courts, to get everything, let them put down the intifada, let them annex the territories, the Arabs, the economic system, and the education system. And then, after 4 years, we give you a state the way it should be. If Israel is not going to do that, and if we can't persuade the people to take their fate in their own hands, then I don't know what it's going to be. I have great fears to Israel's survival. Yeah.
I understand the concept of a government of national emergency where you have one party ruling until the emergency is solved. My problem is that you set the referendum before you choose the party. If you're going to have a government, an elected government by the people, then the party that wins must set the policy.
In the referendum, it says the only parties that may run are parties that accept the following platform. So the party, in order to run, must accept this platform. Otherwise, it is an illegal party.
Which essentially, based on the last election, only is tough, isn't that right?
I don't think so. I think that there are any number of groups in Israel which privately would love to say what Kach says, but don't have the courage to do, and especially when they face this racist ban. So they don't say it. Certainly, Chia would like to say it, except for that crazy woman, but otherwise, they're all for it. They're all for it. All of them are for it. But they can't say it because racist and so forth. They love to say. If a referendum would open the door to any party who wants to say it, you see how many parties would understand. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one of the present established parties. A whole bunch of new parties are going to pop up, especially if they think that they can be the one party. In any event, know one thing. Nothing could be worse than it is today. You have nothing to lose. The present system is leading to a disaster of massive proportions. Nothing could be worse. We are headed towards a crumbling, just terrible. Yes.
You say that the army can move, say, 100,000 settlers to rebuild some road, but how would you in turn move, say, hundreds of thousands of Arabs out from Israel?
The Arabs can't remove Jews because it's not going to shoot them. But I have no such compunction. And the Arabs know that. One of the great things about it is that it'll be a very, very, very swift move because they're going to run. Because they're convinced that we'll shoot. Certainly so. Sure, I don't want to shoot at anybody, but they are told to move, and they know that Khan is crazy. And he'll tell the army, if they don't move, shoot. They don't move them. That's guaranteed. I mean, this is guaranteed. I mean, I served in the army a number of times when I was sent to put down rioting, and it always stopped immediately. Always. I mean, where I never had to shoot a single arrow. It stopped immediately. It was, you could feel the fear in the air. You could taste it. You could touch it. And that saved our lives. This is the irony of it. It was only in cities where they weren't afraid that Arabs were shot and killed.
This is the incredible thing about it. It's so clear to anybody. Yes.
Is there any reason that conference become a one-man party with just one speaker, one person expressing their opinions?
Look, had Kaf run in this election, you would have seen the number of really talented people that Kaf had. Tremendously talented people. Do you think that Kaf could have gotten where it got because of one person? There's an organization there. Tremendous organization. We had a budget of $32,000 a month until being involved. We had big offices all over the country, red trucks and walkie-talkies, and good ones with a base radio, a 12-meter tower. It was tremendous. It was a real good, a pleasure to see, an organization running. I was never used to that. It was running properly because it had money, it paid the people, and when you pay somebody, a person, you can't depend upon volunteers. The volunteers can supplement a paid staff, but you can't expect the volunteers to come in at 8 o'clock and work till midnight. You can expect it from a paid person who is not only paid but also believes in it. Tremendously talented people. But it was that they didn't get an opportunity in this election to be seen. Yeah. Yes. And what? Nothing that I'm going to do myself, except that, for example, the kibbutz would not be given the tax benefits it has now. I have nothing against the kibbutz per se. I have nothing against it. But it will not get the preferential treatment it has gotten till now. For example, I'll give you an example. I once asked a question to the minister, one of the ministers, Minister of Agriculture. How much water? What is the percentage of water given to kibbutzim and moshavim and cities? The kibbutzim make up 3% of the country and get 1/3 of the water. And it's enough. They will get their fair share. I certainly don't want to hurt them. They have got to be shrunk into their proper position. That's the fair play for the Moshavim, the Kibbutzim, and so on. I'm certainly not going to take the Kibbutzim and do to them what they would do to me if they could. The Kibbutz serves a very, very vital purpose in the economy of Israel. It's to know what its purpose is and not beyond that. So, yes.
One other question. Why do you think it is impossible for the Arab population to accept a small piece of territory as to be a sovereign state, and then to have that result in an overall climate of peace between Jewish people of Israel and the Arab world? Why is that an impossibility?
Because they believe that the rest of the country is also there.
Well, just because they believe that, well, some of them believe,
all of them believe it. Every one of them believes it. And furthermore, when you give up land, he's convinced that you did it out of weakness.
It's Egypt with the fire. Isn't that where they began to say the one thing to make the peace there so far in?
Well, first of all, it's very vital for people to realize that there's no peace with Egypt. There's no war with Egypt. The Egyptian papers daily revile Egypt. They have broken the peace treaty in 1,000 different ways. They don't allow tourists into Israel. They don't allow their cultural tourists into Israel. They don't do anything. There's a book fair now in Cairo. Israel is not allowed allowed in. When the soldier murdered 7 Israelis, we still have not gotten a penny of, compensation from them. 11 years, 1956 to 1967, under Nasser, there was no war. You think that Nasser signed a peace treaty with Israel? Of course not. As long as Egypt believes it will lose a war, it has no reason to start a war. The moment it believes that it can win a war in conjunction with other states, it will join the war. Period. You don't give up land to a nation which started 4 wars with you. You do not give up land. Period. Otherwise, why should they not start again? Why should they see it start? They start a war, they lose, and you give up land? In any event, the Palestinians want all of Israel. They believe it is really theirs. They believe that time is on their side. They believe that Israel is weak. Every retreat that Israel makes convinces them that Israel is weak. And the next step will be the next step, and the next step. The moment that they get that land that they have, then they'll start talking about the boundaries of 1947. When Arafat said that he recognizes 242, what most yo-yos here did not realize, that he said within the context of all the UN resolutions, including 181 of 1947, which established a Jewish state without Jaffa, without Romney, without Lido, without Beersheba, without Oslo, without Ashdod, without the Western Galilee, which is a pretty tiny state. And the resolution which called for allowing the Arab refugees to go back to their homes of 1948. What, crazy? Nothing. Not a thing, nothing, not a thing to resist, nothing. They should be grateful that we don't take all the occupied land that they hold, like southern Lebanon and Jordan and all the rest. Yeah.
I don't think there's nothing in the
what? Wait. Yeah.
I wonder if the question of and my sense is possible here, the better government decides to arrest what is the reaction from supporting this and how you feel it?
Yeah. People, I'm saying second question first. People in Israel do not, they have a tremendous tolerance. They take anything. They're not going to riot because of Kehane. They'll sit around in the cafe saying, "Boy, that's terrible! What is terrible! For a week they'll say terrible, and that's that. They're not going to do anything. They're not as supportive. The supporters, what can they do? Burn down the city? I don't want them to burn down it. And they're not going to burn down the city. No. Israel is not a place like over here where riots and demonstrations managed to get President Johnson to say that he's not running. It's a different world over here. As to your first question about the visa and so on, look, in America there is a policy that if you're not a citizen and you have a criminal record, you do not have to be given a visa. This is the law. I have a long criminal record. A long. So they don't have to give me a visa if I'm not a citizen. So my hope, the point is, that I claim that I am a citizen. And that will be heard in the court. But if I should lose, they do not have to give me a visa. There is no obligation on any country to give any alien a visa. I'm barred from Canada. I'm barred from England. I'm barred from Belgium. They stopped me at the toll booth at Staten Island. Yeah.
Israel's stupidity allowed Papa to go to international arbitration.
Right.
It was obvious they were going to lose. Have they lost? Have they learned?
They've lost. They've lost. Have they learned from it?
No, have they learned anything that they can't win international arbitration?
No. Obviously not. Obviously not. Obviously not. They lost out. Finish. Yes.
Well, if you make this these elections, will that mean that the Army still stay there and the second state will not come into existence?
If what? If the Shamir?
Into elections.
Yes. You mean on what land?
Yes. Will that mean number one, will the Army still stay there?
It would appear, yes. On the other hand, one of the things that people don't realize is what was written in Camp David. Most people have never seen the Camp David Accord. Under the Camp David Accords of Begin signed, when autonomy goes into effect, the Israeli army will leave all the cities and go into camps in the area, and the police will be taken over by the Arabs. That's what Begin signed. Well, people don't realize that. The average person has never seen the Camp David Accord. But that is what Begin signed. Now, no question that if autonomy comes into effect, and Shamir has been talking about autonomy, that the Arabs wouldn't immediately come and say, all right, this is what you signed.
So where will the state in that?
I have no problem with the Israeli army on. Quite the opposite. I would love the army to leave and to leave us there alone. We have no problem with it. I'm willing to. But the army's purpose in the territories is not to protect Jews from Arabs, but to protect Arabs from settlers. Of course, this is true. If you gave the settlers a free hand, it would be like the old Wild West. I mean, the Indians would not be there. Certainly so. Yes.
Do you really plan to compensate for the Arabs going to leave under your plan?
Absolutely. But not at once. First of all, we have a big debt which the Arabs owe to Sephardic Jews. The Jews from Arab countries are owed at least $4 billion. And we expect they will give us bills, them bills. Well, on this I'll go to arbitration. On that, I can't lose. I can't, because they'll recognize these bills and they'll recognize those bills. And we'll probably come out having them owe us money. I'm sure of that. You don't know how much money Jews left behind in Baghdad and in Cairo. Incredible amount. Yes.
Really intifada, the PLO is not letting the Arab workers come into Israel.
Right.
Workers there. That's still going on, and either way,
it's a crazy thing. 3 days they won't come, 2 days they do come. 3 days they work, 2 days they go stone. If you would realize it, this is a golden opportunity for them to get rid of Arab workers and compel Jews to learn to work. If they would only realize there's time that if they bit the bullet now, they would save Israel in every way. But they don't realize it, or they're too frightened to bite the bullet. And they're continually pushing things aside, maybe putting it, tomorrow maybe, it'll be better tomorrow. It's a golden opportunity for them. Pity. Yeah.
How long is yeshiva today?
Our yeshiva?
Yeah.
11 students. First of all, we are picky about whom we choose. We are selective about whom we choose. You don't just choose anyone. There's certainly no need for one more yeshiva in Yerushalayim. There are plenty of yeshivas. There's a need for 8 different yeshivas. This is different, very, very different. And so, there are 11 students. And a second reason is, of course, the facilities. We under difficult conditions, very small, cramped, and so on. We're in the process now of buying a building. So I'm running around trying to borrow money. If anybody wants to lend me money, I'm happy. I'll pay it back eventually. Anyway, we are buying a building. We want to buy a building that is large enough for half it to be used by the yeshiva and the other half as an identity center. For seminars and leisure training and so on, including every summer bringing over a certain number of selected top people for an 8-week leadership training program. And we'll see what's in the meantime, I don't know what it'll be tomorrow, and we'll see. We go from day to day. Yes, any other questions on this? Yes.
How many members got from people?
Where? In Israel? About 6,000 to 7,000 members. In Israel, people don't join parties easily. People vote. People vote for parties. Unless it's a party that can give them work, jobs. Then they join the party. We can't give them jobs, so they don't join. And we don't push for membership really. We don't push for membership. We push for votes. When you get the votes and you have power, then you have the members. Then suddenly everybody's going to come running to you. All the, I was a supporter years and years. Just like I met in America, I met about close to 230,000 members of JDL. So if they would be a cop member, of course. Every taxi driver is a cop. So look at it. It's like there are 500,000 members of the Irgun in Israel. Everybody was in the Irgun. So, anyway, yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Then I just want to finish up before before I turn this over. And that is, again, the key project which Koch is going to be working on now is this national emergency government. And it's a very sensitive issue, and it's a delicate issue, and it's a kind of issue that we have to be careful with, because this is the kind of issue that you can wind up in jail with like that. We are not calling for an overthrow of the government. We are calling for a referendum which the people demand the freezing of democracy. Unless that happens, the country is going to go under. That you can just see, you can feel it, you can touch it. The country falling apart, crumbling apart in every way, socially and economically and politically and militarily. And above all, there is a feeling of despondency in the country, which we never saw before. A feeling of depression, a feeling of fear. What is going to be? So there was a time when people asked, and not with despondency, but today there's a real fear, and people are running away from this. We must put an end to it. We must change the system. A referendum in which the people demand the dispersal of the Knesset, an immediate election within a month, in which the only parties allowed to run are parties that accept that minimum program, and they are committed to implementing it. They have the election, one party wins, that's all. One party. And for 4 years, they have a free hand to implement this program. Put down the Intifada, annex the territories, move the Arabs out, change the economic system to capitalism, free enterprise, and change the educational system of Israel into one which gives pride and Jewishness to young people. That is what must be done. If England could do it in World War II for 6 years to freeze democracy, we can do it for 4 years. But our position is far, far more dangerous than that of England. England, at the very worst case, would have been constant. In our case, we'll be exterminated. Yes. Yeah.
One reason we don't know anything about yet, the government does dissolve, and the government calls for the election. There's no confidence vote passes somehow. Something happens with the Assad or the army or whatever. If there were new elections, would you run again as a party?
We will certainly run. We will certainly run again. However, we'll be running on a platform demanding this referendum. No, if you're calling for allowing the people to vote on this thing, you're not advocating anything. You're saying, let the people vote on it. Now, having said that, who knows? Anybody who predicts anything about Israel is either a prophet or he's crazy. There are no prophets today. And so, I mean, you can't predict anything. You can't predict anything with the country. Nobody knows what will be tomorrow. Who believes that Shamir, after standing firm, would invite in Shimon Peres for the specific purpose of having elections in the territories and an international peace conference and so on? Who believes that? This is the final question. It was the fourth of here.
How is Gush Emunim responding to Shmir based on that?
They are on a hunger strike. They're on a hunger strike opposite his office. If I was Shamir, I would pay them to go on hunger strike. You want to go on hunger strike? I sent him a TV set. I said, what is it? We're on a hunger strike. What do you want on a hunger strike? Instead of a hunger strike, Gush Emunim that has so much power in the territories called for 5,000 Jews to go out and smash the nearest Arab village. That would have a more profound impact than anything else. But they won't do that, and that's the problem. Okay, let's. You want to take it now? Yeah, take it. No. Take it now.
Either people are getting cold and putting on their jackets or they're getting ready to leave. And I think it's the latter. Well, Shalom, I'm glad to see some familiar faces. And I'm even happier to see some new faces because this shows me a reaffirmation towards a commitment towards an ideological movement